moving in, and a swathe of wet and windy weather crosses the country, with the strongest winds arriving in the northwest later in the day. Really late afternoon and into the evening, we're likely to see wind gusts of 70 or 80 miles an hour for western Scotland, hence the amber warning. Could be some serious impacts from that and some coastal flooding.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. Labour's war on working Brits.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which could see millions of people newly dragged into higher tax brackets.
It comes as the Chancellor is going to bring an extra £7 billion in revenue, apparently, but the move raised questions about Labour's honesty on tax rises during the election.
The NHS, though, has been promised billions in what's being called its biggest reform since 1948, as the Health Service Chief admits that productivity and public confidence has indeed plummeted.
Also for you today, the King and Queen are on their 6-day tour of Australia. They're greeted by the country's Prime Minister and a torrential rainstorm.
As the US presidential election draws closer, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both hold rallies in the swing state of Michigan. But who came out on top?
Should we be teaching school kids about British values? Well, the former Home Secretary, Lord Blunkett, seems to think so and says if we don't, we might live to regret it.
For many of us, a fine day today, but brewing out in the Atlantic, we have Storm Ashley. That's going to bring a wet and windy spell for all tomorrow, and for some, the winds could cause some problems. Join me later for a full forecast.
It's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is GB News Breakfast.
Morning to you. And we have Mark Foster with the sport today. Good morning.
Very good morning.
Welcome along.
Thanks for having me.
To this slightly chaotic sort of setup that we have in the morning.
Yeah, it's a bit early, isn't it? Have you noticed? Yeah.
Well, I'm used to morning swimming, but this is a little bit,
Yes, I suppose, actually, being a swimmer, you get up at stupid hours, don't you, to get the pool to yourself?
Yeah, but that's more like using the body, whereas this is a bit more about using my mind. So
well, only slightly, Mark. Only slightly.
I'm sure you can do it.
We don't use our minds that much on this show, do we, Anne?
No. In fact, I'm very worried this morning because there's a very funny smell in the studio.
It's not me.
It's wet dog.
Well, it might be me.
No, it's not you. It's here before you came in.
Wet dog? There'd be no dog.
It's not wet dog, then. It's wet sawdust. Do you agree, Mark? There's a funny smell, isn't there?
I don't know, unless it's me. Maybe I brought you smelly dog smelling for me.
No,
I can't say I noticed
it's wet sawdust. It's definitely there. And also, you've got new chairs since I've been away.
Yes, but they're the same as the old chairs.
Yeah, except that my old chair had special wheels on it to make me at least be sort of similar height to you. And now this is a low one again.
Yes, I know. Someone's nicked your special wheels.
My special wheels are gone.
There's actually a thing on the side of it to lift you up.
Yeah,
no, this is at maximum
that's
height.
As far it goes.
Okay.
This is maximum height
really
plus a cushion.
Don't stand next to her.
No, please don't.
No, that would be because you're tall anyway. Now, here's one for you this morning. What do you do to relax? Don't say go on a cruise and have a Bacardi.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, there's a new poll out. This is in The Sun this morning. Saying that if we want to chill out, we pop bubble wrap, browse property sites... and tidying up.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's not relaxing.
No. But
that's awful.
That's the way we relax and lift our spirits, apparently.
Yeah, no.
You do like to browse a property website,
I do like to browse, and I must confess that I like to occasionally go around a few houses as well and have a look.
Yeah.
And it is because I am sincerely a serious buyer, except that I'm not really.
Yeah.
And I've been away for the last 2 weeks, and I had a little look at what, if I could afford a property, what I would go around. And I had a look around some houses.
Very, very
they
tempted.
were delicious.
Yeah.
They were delicious.
I know, you need to make the most of it.
Yeah.
Out there in the sunshine, how lovely.
I don't know whether anyone watching is retired yet or thinking of retirement, and whether what Rachel Reeves is possibly going to announce in the next few weeks is scaring you rigid and actually making you think of buying abroad and maybe retiring abroad. I don't know, but that was in the back of my mind as I was looking around a couple of beautiful houses.
It's an interesting point, though. Is it actually any better abroad?
I don't know. You see, that's it. You need
you always
a
think
lot of advice.
Better elsewhere, but it's not necessarily you've got to get, like, if you went to Spain, for example, a lot of people do, you've got to get residencia now, which is very difficult because of Brexit and all that stuff. So it's quite difficult, actually. So whether it's any better anywhere else, I don't know. But anyway, the budget is putting chills through a lot of us this morning.
Yeah, in fact, anyway, if you are keen on going on holidays, for instance, the Daily Mail is leading particularly on the fact that she may even put up the taxes on air passenger duty, which would mean that airfares would go up, basically. And that might actually penalise you if you're the sort of person who likes a couple of holidays a year.
But, of course, working people aren't going to be hit, are they? That's what we were told during the election.
But working people don't go on holidays?
Yeah, well, apart from the fact that millions of taxpayers could find themselves paying a higher rate of tax, income tax, after the budget.
Yeah, that's as she prepares to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which Labour previously criticised, actually, as being a stealth tax.
Well, it comes as the NHS is also expected to be handed billions of pounds in the budget after accepting it must make fundamental reforms to the service.
Now, bosses within the health service, however, have refused to promise that the cash will be enough to meet Labour's manifesto pledge of reducing waiting lists.
Well, let's talk to political commentator Theo Usherwood, who's here. Good to see you this morning, Theo.
Lovely to be here.
I don't know what to say about this, really, because it seems like incredibly grim news, except we already knew it was going to be grim, because that's what the Prime Minister told us.
So, look, let's start with this, what the plans are around freezing the income tax threshold, because, of course, there was that triple lock promise in the Labour manifesto ahead of the election, and Keir Starmer is insisting that he's going to keep to that, and that was not to increase VAT, national insurance contributions or income tax. Now, technically, you could say that Labour has no plans to increase income tax whatsoever, and it won't increase whether it's the basic rate or the higher rate or indeed the additional rate. However, what they are looking to do is to stick with the thresholds beyond 2028, 2029, and that's going to leave more people. And we're not talking about rich people here.
No.
We're talking about people on modest incomes. We're talking about senior nurses. We're talking about teachers, maybe towards the end of their profession. Many of them will be watching this. We're talking about senior police officers on 50 grand a year and now going, or approaching 50 grand a year, who are suddenly going to get themselves a modest pay rise, 2 or 3%, and then get dragged into that higher rate of tax at 40p in the pound, and they're going to end up paying, some of them, you know, if you're getting 2% pay rise and you go from 50 to 55 grand, you're going to be ending up paying an extra £1,000 in income tax. But it's very effective because there's no wriggle room, there's no way round it. And therefore it's going to raise the Treasury about £7 billion over the course of which was the end of the Parliament.
When would it come? When would it come in? When would it actually trigger?
Well, the Tories have already committed to that. They committed to that, and Labour said they weren't going to change that towards the 2028, 2029. Labour now is saying that they're going to extend it. And that's where the consternation is. Now, you might say that it's not a break in the... And there are...
It's not, technically.
But technically, however, in November last year, and I'm reading a quote here from Rachel Reeves, when the Tories first extended, of course, the freeze on the threshold, she said, people on average earnings are paying more in tax because they are dragged into higher tax brackets. That is a sign of failure. The government is picking the pockets of working people. So in that, she appears to class those on, you know, being dragged into the higher tax brackets as being working people. And Labour said they wouldn't increase taxes on working people. So actually, if you're looking at the spirit of it, maybe not the letter of the of what's happening, they are breaking their manifesto.
Yeah, it is letter of the law to spirit of the law.
Yeah.
I mean, the argument being, of course, if you don't get a pay rise, then you're not going to be taxed anymore.
Precisely.
So I mean, that's the argument, isn't it? Amidst all of this, though, we're also told that the NHS, which we know needs reform, and they say, well, we will reform it, but we'll give them billions of pounds in the process.
So of course, this comes off the back of Lord Darzai's report, his review into the NHS, and he said that it needs reform. And they're looking particularly, and there will be accusations of the nanny state, but they're looking particularly at trying to keep people out of hospital with prevention, particularly focusing on obesity, how that links to heart disease. You can expect more demands for people to come in and check your weight while you're at work, eat fresh fruit and veg, ban on junk food adverts, that type of thing, to try and reform the NHS. But as part of Labour's promise to reduce waiting times, to ensure that people can get a GP appointment, they're not on the phone trying to get through it at 8:30 in the morning, desperate to get a GP appointment which they can't get, the NHS has secured a 3 to 4% a pay rise for next year and the year after, and that amounts to about £10 billion. And the deal is that in return, this was from Amanda Pritchard, the Chief Executive of the NHS, that the NHS is going to implement the reforms to try and keep people out of hospital. However, she does add a caveat where she said, OK, we're going to reform, but we're not necessarily, with this amount of money, this extra money, we're not necessarily going to be able to reduce waiting times to the levels that the government really wants.
But I seem to remember it was said time and again during the election campaign that the problem with the NHS and the reason it needed reform is that every government comes in boasting that they've put more and more money in, but it's not wisely spent, and that's why it just disappears down a drain hole.
Yes.
And yet they seem to be doing the same thing. They're promising more money, and promising long-term reform, but at the moment, are we going to see anything back from the extra money they're putting in?
Well, that is a very good question. You can introduce, whether it's new computer systems or another layer of managers to try and get the NHS working better. That's been the concern previously, that actually these reforms don't amount to anything. But I think what Lord Darzai, who of course was a health minister under Gordon Brown, and of course was a surgeon within the NHS, what he's trying to do and what the NHS is trying to do is actually ensure that people don't end up in hospital in the first place. But that is going to mean, potentially, the state playing a greater role in our lives in terms of telling us what we can eat, telling us to exercise, and in the hope that actually people live healthier lives and therefore don't suffer from things like morbid obesity, don't suffer from heart disease and the like.
But isn't it also, I mean, and that may well be the case, but isn't there an argument to say, well, perhaps that money is going to be put into primary care, so that which means things like, actually better services at pharmacies and more funding for pharmacies, better service at GPs, so actually things can be spotted earlier and to keep us out of hospital. And that would be welcome.
That would be very welcome, yes. And of course, the idea is, that the NHS, after COVID, we saw waiting lists spiral to 7 million. Elective operations now are very difficult to secure on the NHS within any reasonable period of time. And then Wes Streeting also wants to bring in the private sector as well to try and ease the backlog. But it does feel, I think there are those who feel that, and when they hear this and they read this from Amanda Pritchard about this extra settlement, financial settlement, we'll be thinking, how much more money does the NHS need? And I think it's fine if the reforms, as you say, Stephen, if the reforms are delivered, if people go to A&E and instead of waiting, and last time I was in A&E, there was a lad sat next to me who was there for 36 hours. If people see the results where actually, they're in A&E for 2 or 3 hours and they get seen, they get treated, and they come out the other end and they feel better and they're back in the workforce, which is what Labour want to happen, then I think actually the public will be quite forgiving about this extra money. But if people see the NHS getting more money but don't see the results in return, then I think people are going to start scratching their heads. And that's going to be up to Amanda Pritchard, ultimately, to deliver.
And it just still seems, for Rachel Reeves delivering her budget, that she talks about the huge black hole, the financial black hole, the money she's going to need for the NHS and all the rest. You wonder where else she's going to claw it from. And the Daily Mail front page today is talking about the income tax thresholds obviously being frozen and everything, but also maybe she's going to increase the tax on air passenger duty, which would have not only an effect on ordinary people's ability to pay their airfare, but it's going to clobber the airlines, who already feel clobbered.
Yes, and of course, the airlines, they operate on thin margins and they provide hundreds of thousands of jobs right across the economy, in terms of people going on holiday, and airports are, places like Heathrow or Gatwick or Stansted, these are the hubs for the main employers in their communities. So, but I think what's happening a little bit at the moment, and it's something that's called sort of bringing out your dead, is that the Treasury are floating all of these ideas, and then over the next 2 weeks, see what sticks, and it's up to the various organisations that represent, whether it's the airports, whether it's the drivers' associations, to come forward and say, actually, this isn't going to work. So by contrast, there's a conversation taking place about fuel duty, and the RAC has actually come out and said, don't worry about the fuel duty freeze, because actually a lot of the big, providers, fuel providers actually just take it in profit anyway. So I think that's where the Treasury, when these ideas are floated, don't see resistance. I think those are the ideas that are going to stick.
All right, and look, it's all well and good. We don't like it when we have to end up paying more in tax.
No.
However, there can be an understanding if you say, well, it's got to be raised from somewhere. We are short of money, and people can understand that to an extent. However, the whole point of Labour's argument pre-election was that we were going to improve the country by economic growth.
Yes.
We were going to grow the economy. That generates more revenue, more tax revenue. Everything looks rosier. None of these measures seem to help growth. In fact, they all sound like they will stifle growth.
So I think Labour has a slightly different idea about how they secure economic growth. So what I mean by that is that you rightly point out, and this is a view that's, held, I think, conservative view, as well, and not necessarily held on the left of the Labour Party, but where you would make the argument, let's say, national insurance. Are you going to start clobbering employers with an increase in national insurance contributions? And your viewers will be there tapping their fingers on the table. Many of them will have small businesses and they'll go, shall I take on that extra person? Or is it just now not worth it? Labour doesn't necessarily tap into that mindset. It doesn't have a huge amount of experience in business at the very top of government and amongst its MPs, so it doesn't necessarily understand the kind of choices that people are making in that regard. The way they're looking at it is to try and look much more big picture in terms of major infrastructure projects. We're talking about onshore wind farms. GB Energy is crucial to this in securing major foreign investment from abroad to come into this country and set up, put in, private sector comes in with money, and then the government puts forward its own money as well, and then that creates jobs and tax receipts as a result. So they have a slightly different vision. OK, they want economic growth, we all want economic growth, but how we actually get there. And they don't necessarily see small businesses, the private sector, at a quite low level, being the stimulus for economic growth in the same way as you do, Stephen.
OK. Theo, good to see you. We'll catch you later on, I think. Thanks very much indeed.
On to happier news, maybe?
Yeah, well, let's hope so. It's all about the King and Queen.
The royal couple have spent their first night in Australia ahead of their royal tour of Sydney and Canberra.
Well, Their Majesties welcomed to the country by the Australian Monarchist League, who plan to drum up support for them.
Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker will tell you the full story.
Good morning. Well, welcome to base camp of the Australian Monarchist League here in Sydney. King Charles arrived in the country last night with Queen Camilla, and their job over the next 6 days is to volunteer, handing out flags to Australian citizens who have gathered to welcome King Charles and Queen Camilla. Australian Monarchist T-shirts ready for the volunteers to collect. Not only are they volunteering and getting briefed on how to perhaps be as patriotic as possible to the King and Queen, there's also a little bit of a brunch, and I'm very jealous because there's champagne on offer, there's Pimm's and lemonade, and there's croissants and all the rest of it as well. So they're certainly not going hungry here today. I'm delighted to introduce you to now Alexander Volz, who is... Hello, Alexander.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, very well.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. So Alexander is the spokesperson for the Australian Monarchist League, and Alexander, it's a really significant time, the fact that it's the first king ever on Australian soil.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as you can see here, the Australian Monarchist League is out in full force celebrating what is a momentous occasion. I think the tour is going to go really well. We're very optimistic, and at the end of the day, it's a reminder of the significance of our system and just how wonderful it is for this country.
And you're going to have lots of volunteers out and about at the engagements, aren't you? Perhaps being patriotic with all the flags being handed out.
Well, that's certainly the intention. I mean, we love a bit of patriotism in the Monarchist League. We're very proud of our country. We love being Australian. We love our King and Queen of Australia. And so, yes, we'll be distributing a lot of flags. I think we've got about 15,000 ready to go, and I think you've just had a look at them earlier. So, yeah, it's going to be very exciting indeed.
And there's been a lot of noise, hasn't there, around republicanism since this tour was announced. The Republicans in Australia calling it the farewell tour of Oz. How do you respond to that?
Oh, well, I think it's just a classic juvenile Republican campaign once again. Very sleepy, not very interesting. I would like to hear the Republicans tell us how they're going to make our country better than what it already is. And instead of them just attacking people like me and attacking our system of government, which we know through history works so well, what are they going to change for the better? They can't tell us. They've never been able to tell us, so we're just not very interested in them, and we're having a wonderful celebration for the tour.
When King Charles stood off the Australian Air Force flight at the airport in Sydney last night, all the politicians are, I believe, Republicans, aren't they? So what do you make of that kind of image, alongside, of course, the Governor-General? It's a bit odd, isn't it?
Well, the Republicans are the first to criticise the status quo and what we've got, and yet they're the first ones to queue up to meet the royal family. They're the first ones to take their Order of Australia gongs, which is, of course, in the King's name. So, look, it's just a display of hypocrisy, which we know is so prevalent amongst the Republican movement, and no one should be surprised that that's what's happened.
Great, thank you so much, Alexander. Appreciate your time. Well, the King has 6 days worth of engagements here in New South Wales, Sydney and Canberra, and we'll be here all week giving you the absolute latest on the King's Royal Tour.
Cameron Walker living the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful place to report from. Although it is surprising that they're having such terrible rain at the moment.
It's a shame, isn't it? But I bet it's warm rain.
It will be, and it'll be over very quickly.
I mean, that's nothing to worry about.
It'll probably be absolutely gorgeous when we join Cameron a bit later on.
I am oddly jealous, actually. Every now and then, especially when someone you know pops up on the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
You just sort of think,
I bet they're having a good time.
I'd really like to go there.
It's hard work following the royals round, though. If you talk to any royal correspondent, they say it's nowhere near as glamorous as you think.
No, he'll be working his little socks off.
Yeah.
Though I did mention yesterday, and then some numerous lovely viewers and listeners got in touch and sending me their holiday snaps when they've been in Australia. And they had said it was well worth it.
Oh,
I mean, you like it, don't you?
I love Australia, yeah. I had son number 2 in Australia, and we used to go out a lot, yeah. It's a long, long journey to get there, but my goodness, it's worth it.
They're starting non-stop flights, though, aren't they?
I know.
Sydney next year.
Yeah, I used to do non-stop flights. They were mostly with Qantas. No, straight to Sydney.
Really?
Yeah, it was 23 hours, I think it used to be. But a lot of people like to stop off in other places.
Singapore.
Anyway, Singapore, Hong Kong, places like that. And if you spend a day or two having a look at those places, it's not such a terrible journey.
Yeah, head to Raffles.
Actually, when I say non-stop, we must have stopped to refuel, mustn't we?
Yeah, I think
we must have. But we didn't get out. What I mean is we didn't get out and do anything.
Didn't get out your seat.
Yeah, no, didn't even do that. By then you were well asleep. Yeah.
Right, it's 21 minutes past 6. Let's have a look at some of the other key stories this morning.
Well, the pop star Cheryl Cole has paid tribute to Liam Payne following the 31-year-old's death on Wednesday night. Cheryl, who of course shares a 7-year-old son, Bear, with Liam, wrote on Instagram describing his death as earth-shattering, and she reminded the public that he was not only a star, but also a son, a brother, an uncle, a dear friend and a father.
A former police detective has been jailed for 19 years for stealing almost £400,000 worth of cocaine from work to sell on the streets of Manchester. Andrew Talbot was found guilty of misconduct in public office and supplying a Class A drug last month.
And Sir Keir Starmer has agreed a Rwanda-style deal to send migrants who arrive on the Chagos Islands to St Helena, another British sovereign territory in the Atlantic Ocean. Now that's sparked backlash from MPs, with many still angry about the Prime Minister's decision to sign the islands away in the first place, back to Mauritius.
Right, shall we see what the weather's going to do for you today? Here's Alex.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, Storm Ashley could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wish we had a bit of warmth here. It's freezing again. We have such trouble with our air conditioning, don't we? Anyway, do stay with us because 5 times, I think, Olympian Mark Foster will be joining us live in the studio to go through today's sports news. That's next.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
I'm joined now by an acknowledged authority on Ludwig van Beethoven. He's already written 7 books on the subject, and next week his 8th is released. It's called In Search of Beethoven, and it stands apart as a deeply personal account of John Souché's relationship with the great composer as he follows his footsteps from Bonn to Vienna. Yes, I introduce author, journalist and classic FM presenter John Souché.
Hello, Mike.
It's delightful to have you here, and you have, as I say, written now 8 books on Beethoven. So the question is, why Beethoven?
Well, the word that is often used that I don't like is obsession, obsessive, because somehow there's something not quite right about that. The word that I use is passion. I have a passion for this man's life and music that began, I suppose, around 50 years ago, sometime in my early 20s. I can't remember the exact moment. He kind of crept up on me, and suddenly, as I was a journalist, TV journalist all my life, but before that I was a failed musician. I wanted to be a professional musician, but fortunately for the world of music, I realised I didn't have the talent. But this man's music crept up on me, and I knew from then that it would not go away, it would only increase, and that is what's happened. There are other composers I will listen to, minor names like Mozart, Wagner, Haydn, but Beethoven just does it for me. I was highly educated musically at school because I loved it, to the extent that I wanted to turn professional, but as I say, I didn't have the talent, but that has stayed with me. I read music, I understand music, as you say, I play the trombone, in those days to quite a high level.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
6:28. This is GB News Breakfast with Little and Large.
Yeah, it is a bit. I need another cushion.
It's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah. I have to conduct a search for my old chair.
Yeah.
Because that was a bit higher.
Or maybe someone's need to. You bought those wheels yourself, special wheels.
Special wheels to bung on, yeah, and it gave me another sort of, I don't know, 10 centimetres or something. That helped.
Where there's blame, there's a claim.
Yeah. I shall go in search of my old chair.
Someone's been a bit light-fingered.
It'll be in a cupboard somewhere.
It could possibly be Mark Foster. Because
do you think?
He's turned
because
up
he seems
today.
to be very tall, suspiously tall, actually, there at the end. Looking at the end of the
wheels.
table.
Your wheels are all right. Morning, Mike. You've got all the sport for us today.
Yes.
Should we talk football? Thomas Tuchel.
Yeah, should it matter if the England manager is English or not?
What do you think?
No.
Doesn't
I
matter.
don't think it does.
No.
I think the bottom line is down to results.
Well, yeah, I mean, no one will care if we keep winning.
No.
No, exactly.
That thing. He's A bit controversial, though, can't he? Can he upset the dressing room a little bit?
What, at Chelsea?
Well, I don't know where he's played before. I've no idea. I mean, I don't know nothing about
Well,
sport,
I'm going to
Mark,
say he's managed Chelsea, he's managed Bayern Munich, Paris Saint-Germain, Dortmund. So he's managed some of the biggest clubs in the world. If you look at Gareth Southgate, when he came in, he'd only managed Middlesbrough. I mean, nothing against Middlesbrough, but it's not a big team. So he's been in the Premier League before. He's worked with a lot of the Premier League players. Therefore, he should know the system. Therefore, he should know a lot of the personalities and hopefully, presumably, do a good job. He won the Champions League with Chelsea, which in my mind is pretty good.
But I mean, we haven't always had English people as England
Sven.
managers. Sven is the most famous you can think of. Yeah.
Capello as well.
Yeah.
No, they both did. They both did a stint.
But I mean, if you're not careful, it's people like the press, the media, who make a big thing of it, where actually it doesn't need to be stirred up.
No.
You know, the trouble doesn't need to be stirred up. They've been asking him if he'd sing the national anthem. Well, we never asked Sven that, did we?
No, but I suppose it's after Lee, what's his face, the interim, who is British, said he wasn't going to.
Yeah,
Lee Carsley.
Yeah.
So don't ask anymore, you know, let's just see what happens.
But is it more about singing a national anthem or knowing the words to it, which I'm sure he will, or the results they get on the pitch?
I think the most important thing is the results,
ultimately,
don't you think?
We haven't won the World Cup since 1966. That's the big thing.
Oh,
So
if
as long as
we did win the World Cup, which is going to be within his tenure in the next 18 months.
Oh, it will be, won't it?
Yes.
Led by a German, I don't know, would that be bittersweet? I don't know.
I guess it comes out, club football were managed by lots of foreign players all over the pitch. Man City, Pep Guardiola. If he came in, would people be saying, because a lot of people are going, we love Pep Guardiola. What, just because it's Pep Guardiola and he's that great a coach? I think Thomas Tuchel's a great coach and his resume says it itself.
Well, one thing he will be learning straight away, and he probably never needed to be told, is that it's very high profile and nearly everything you say will be, speculated upon, criticised, the back pages will be full of him from now on. I mean, it makes him a very, very big deal, doesn't it?
It does. And they will learn it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Scrutiny is huge, isn't it?
We've got the US Grand Prix this weekend.
Yes.
How's it looking?
6 more races to go. Max Verstappen is leading. He won 7 of the first 10 races, which gave him a massive lead. But Lando Norris is in second place, and I think he's 52 points behind with 6 races to go. But that sounds like an awful lot of points. And it is an awful lot of points. But the point system within Formula One, being 25 for first, 18 second, 15, 12, 10, down to 10th place. So if Max Verstappen, for argument's sake, crashed in one of the races, Lando Norris wins one, it's then down to 27 points. So it could get tight. I mean, all the reports is that Lando Norris has got an uphill battle, but this could be Max Verstappen's 4th race in a row.
Wow. It's interesting that apparently McLaren's saying it's still going to be a success even if they don't beat Verstappen and Red Bull. Yeah, and that's probably how much the cars progress. Because as you know, historically, you've had Red Bull have been a dominant force. Going back, Benetton were a dominant force. Mercedes. So it's one of these things when a constructor has a car that's so good, it's difficult for other cars to be competitive. I think Lando Norris is also, we're always talking about Hamilton. Lando Norris over the last few seasons has improved an awful lot. So I think that's what they're probably looking at. The car's improved, drivers improved, and they're being competitive. Yeah. Right, a bit of sailing, should we?
Yeah, how are we doing in the sailing? Not so good.
No, not so good. It's 6-2 to New Zealand.
Just a reminder, it's the America's Cup. Which we've never won.
And it is off the coast of Barcelona.
Looks wonderful, doesn't it?
It's at best of 13 races, which means first to 7. New Zealand are 6-2 up. So they've got to basically, Ben Ainsley and Ineos have to win the last 5 races over the next 3 days. Not impossible, pretty difficult. Ben Ainsley came out and said that the New Zealand team are like the All Blacks. They're that dominant.
I must say, and apologies to people listening on the radio, but the way they film it nowadays is spectacular, isn't it? You can see where they put little flags, little virtual flags over each boat, so you can tell exactly who's doing what and where they all are. It makes it live, because when I've watched it before, you can't tell which boat is which.
When they're, this is probably a layman term, but when they're tacking, whatever the term is, when they're so far apart from each other.
Yeah.
Who's winning when they get to the turn and all
Yeah.
the rest of it. I mean, they're side by side a lot of the time.
But now
It's
the
really
way they
exciting.
use graphics to show you what exactly is going on makes it a viewing sport now. It makes it a television sport.
And absolutely. And have you seen the boats? Well, they're amazing.
Well, yeah. I mean, they'd be as sophisticated as these F1 cars, won't they, in many respects?
And they practically fly, don't
Know
they?
how fast they go?
No.
I was just reading up this earlier. 55 knots, which I went, 55 knots,
Yeah,
what does that mean? 65 miles an hour.
Yeah. It's quite a speed, isn't it? It just seems a real shame because we had so much hope, didn't we, ahead of this America's Cup? We thought we really could do it.
Yeah. And I guess because we don't see that much of it, it's every 3 or 4 years, we buy in when we've got a team in there.
Yeah.
So we don't know an awful lot about sailing and we get excited. But I wish we got a little bit more coverage. I know Ben Ainsley from Olympics. He won 4 Olympics on the trot. Obviously a great skipper. They're up against it. Got to win 5 out of the last 5 races, but
that's true of a lot of sports. I mean, even yours, swimming, is that we only sort of generally take an interest
once every 4 years.
Yes,
in the games.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, football it keeps going all the time. You could say the same about cricket and tennis, I suppose. But there are other sports which are terribly important, but only at certain times in a 4-year cycle.
Yes, unfortunately. I think they should show a lot more swimming and gymnastics and all these other sports. It's one of these things that people get really excited about Olympic sport only once every 4 years because it becomes into their psyche. But we should cover the Olympics every year. Well, there should be an Olympics every year and you get more excited about it.
Maybe we get bored of it, though, if that happened. You never know.
That is true. It wouldn't be so special.
Wouldn't be quite so special. Lovely, Mark. Look, we'll see you a little bit later on. Thank you very much. I tell you what is very special. It's a Great British Giveaway.
Yes.
And the clock is ticking. The lines close on Friday.
Make sure you don't miss out on your chance to win 36 grand in tax-free cash. Here's all the details you need for a chance to make it yours.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. And you really could. Good luck.
Right, we've got the papers heading your way very shortly. Fraser Myers and Stephanie Tetchy are going to take us through their selection from this morning's newspapers. That's in a couple of minutes.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're joined by Lewis Oakley and Esther Stanhope. And Lewis, let's start with free gear care, shall we? It's been the story of the week, and apparently it's led to, well, calamity in the polls.
Yeah, so he has dropped by 26 points in the opinion polls. And, I mean, it's just been sort of going down from day one. He didn't even start that high. But, yeah, this is just bad optics. As we say, like, he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong, everything was declared, but at the same time you're telling people they don't get their winter fuel allowance and you're there walking off with your swag bag. It's just not a good look. And even, you know, I was thinking as well, the optics of them trying to clamp down on MPs having second jobs. You know, any of those could turn around and say, well, actually, we have to pay for our own clothes. I just think it's just bad optics that he's had. And, you know, we've got those comparisons of Sunak in the stands, he's just sat amongst the people. And
Prince William goes to Villa games, albeit in the director's box, but it's not an 8k per game seat. And by the way, can I just mention, this isn't just an isolated Labour incident. Since the start of their tenure, they were accused of filling the civil service with previous Labour donors, previous Labour aides, people who worked for Labour Together think tank. The civil service is meant to be politically neutral, and they bypassed a lot of procedures to get people into their positions, not least the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who parachuted Ian Caulfield, his name was, who donated £5 grand personally to her, and then he ended up in the Treasury with a 175k a year job. Yes, he did resign after it was revealed in the Times, but it does make you wonder, you know, you've spent years having to go at the Tories for this, and you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's full of hypocrisy, and also the whole Sue Gray thing, and they were slagging off the Conservatives for not towing the line, and now they're being hypocrites because now they're taking freebies.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
6:41. Let's have a look at the newspapers for you. The Financial Times leads on the Chancellor's plans to apparently keep the freeze on income tax thresholds, which over the next few years would drag an extra 1 million people into higher tax rate bands.
Well, the Daily Mail is also leading on that story, calling it a tax raid also on your holidays.
The Guardian has ministers calling for further resignations of therapists as claims of abuse surge.
The Times has a snapshot of the Queen arriving in Australia yesterday ahead of their 6-day tour.
The Mirror has Cheryl Cole's tributes to Liam Payne, of course, the father of her son.
Yeah. Joining us to go through what's making the news today, Deputy Editor of Spiked Online, Fraser Myers, and journalist Steffi Tecci. It's lovely to see you both.
Great to be back.
Morning. Right, well, let's start then, Fraser, with the Chancellor. There are so many front pages about what she might be doing to us very shortly.
Everyone is looking with absolute horror onto this budget, and this is possibly the latest. Maybe this is the most predictable thing. She's basically allowing fiscal drag, essentially. Yeah. So, like the Tories did before, we should say. Tax thresholds were frozen in 2021. They were also frozen a lot throughout the George Osborne austerity period, which people are getting quite horrible flashbacks to at the moment. And basically what it means is that lots of people will be dragged into paying higher rates of tax. But Rachel Reeves will be able to say, well, look, I haven't technically raised tax. So the government will collect more, you will pay more, but Reeves won't have actually moved any of the tax numbers. So that will allow her to say, I haven't broken a manifesto promise to raise taxes on working people.
To be fair, I'm trying to balance it out. This is bringing a lot of attacks on her. She's on about extending it past 28, 29. So actually, we wouldn't see the effects of this for another 5-6 years.
Well, we're sort of already living through it now because it's extending it from 2021.
Yeah, but that's already that's nothing to do with her.
That's already baked in. Yes, no, it's nothing to do with it. And they all do it.
Can you please explain in words of one syllable? If the income tax threshold is being frozen, that sounds like good news.
No,
but because of inflation, your pay goes up each year, even if you're on the minimum wage, for instance. Your pay will go up slightly, and that can push you into the higher band. So even by you standing still, or you seemingly standing still, the tax rate standing still, you end up paying more into the exchequer. Now it's interesting because obviously how much she raises will depend on inflation for that reason.
And inflation has fallen.
And inflation has fallen. So actually, this might not be as successful as it would have been, had she announced had it been announced a few years ago.
Are people's wages automatically going up?
Well,
because it doesn't feel like it is.
No, not necessarily. Some will, but
not automatically. But minimum wage goes up every year, and also most people expect an inflation pay rise. That has been difficult, obviously, when inflation's been at 10%. But a lot of people do get sort of 2%, 3% most years.
Yeah, it's about things like this. But it's the fact that Rachel Reeves called this, I can't remember what the exact words were, but like a sneaky tax on working people.
Stealth tax.
Stealth tax on working people. When she was in opposition.
Only a year ago.
That's right. And also when she was in opposition, she was attacking Rishi Sunak for raising employers' national insurance, which she is currently planning to do. She described that as a tax on jobs that would reduce employers' incentives to hire people, which I agree with that old version of Rachel Reeves. That is certainly true. We all know that these taxes are coming. It's all baked in. We already are creaking under the highest rates of tax since, I think, the Second World War. It's a very bleak time. Hopefully, you know, there has been good news on the inflation front, as you said. Hopefully there'll be some good news on the growth front as well, because that is the only answer out of this conundrum.
Well, that's what they promised.
There is a limit to the amount we can tax.
That's what they promised throughout the election campaign.
Yeah.
Don't see
they
how
would
it's
go
going
for
to happen
growth.
with this.
Yeah, are they saying that their plans will lead to growth in, you know, a year's time, 2 years' time, a couple of years' time? I don't think people can wait around.
No, this is a problem. Steph, let's have a look at The Guardian, should we? All this coldness, I mean, I have to say this has passed me by, but there's always concern about therapists.
There is. There's no doubt that this country has a mental health crisis. You know, over 5 million people were referred for help. But now there's a worrying trend at the moment that there needs to be a regulation of psychotherapists and counsellors, because there's been this onslaught of lawsuits by patients who claim that they've been abused by therapists or they've done more harm than help. And, you know, it's the only area of the healthcare system which is not actually regulated. So, you know, nurses, doctors, anything in the medical field is regulated. But it seems that anybody could just do a course within a few weeks and call themselves a counsellor. So now, if you're looking after someone who's got quite fragile mental health, are you actually fully qualified to look after such people, which is now leading to these lawsuits and calls for ministers to potentially look at regulating the field more?
I mean, I think most people would be staggered that it hasn't already been regulated.
This is what I'm thinking, especially when we've got such a big mental health crisis on our hands.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
mean,
really surprised.
There are professional bodies around psychiatry and therapy and things like that, but there's no obligation for you to be a part of it if you want to, you know, set up a website or something and call yourself a therapist. This is a very common thing, you know, as a sort of small business or, you know, sole trader thing. It's quite dangerous, really.
I think if people just think, oh, if I'm a good listener, then I could be a therapist, but there's much more
there's much
to it, especially mental health. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah. Oh, well, it'd be interesting to see what happens with that, because I say most of us, if you were going, not that I've never done it, I have to say, but if you were going to a counsellor, you would still think.
You need some reassurance that they know what they're doing, especially if you're feeling vulnerable. Right, as I tuck into my coffee,
yes,
I am going to take. We're going to take a short break because we have to do that now. But in a couple of moments, we'll talk about the fact that most of us are drinking coffee now in Britain instead of tea.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
We shot with the London Eye in the background, so it's quite an iconic shoot to do my cover of the Playboy magazine. So.
And you moved into the mansion for a while. Hugh called you the British Carmen Electra. You were one of his favourites, and it's renowned for its parties, of course. Over there, you must have had a few of those. Must have been wild times.
Fantastic parties, yeah. I mean, I met some incredible people. I will forever respect him and everyone at Playboy for the love and the support.
And you were on giant billboards, you were modelling for Nike, for Reebok, you're earning thousands of pounds a day.
Well...
absolutely like living the dream in terms of a model's lifestyle, and then things began to change.
Well, I've been living in Windsor for 4 years, and I can't get back into Windsor at the moment. The rents have gone ridiculous. I was paying $550 a month, and then the landlord just turned around one day and said I need to be paying $750. And I didn't really have a proper tenancy agreement, and I looked through it and I said, oh, can we get something in writing? And he was like, oh. So in the end, I wrote a tenancy agreement out from off the internet and I got it all signed. But then he went, if you're not going to pay the extra £250 a month, then you're going to have to move out. And I was like, well, you're going to have to give me 4 weeks. I can't just move out. I've got nowhere to go. And I think he thought he could just throw me out there and then... And he said, I've got someone that's going to move in that's going to pay £700-800 a month. So I went and got the tent, and I thought maybe this will be the way I can go for a few months or so, and it was still summer a few months back when I became homeless. So, I got the tent and I got all the cooking equipment and what have you from the money I got from some of the jobs I did, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to I'm going to go and be a free spirit for a bit, and I'm going to have to just do my own thing. And you know what? It was the biggest mental relief to be able to have my own space. I mean, that was so liberating. Absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
£6:51, Fraser Myers, Stephanie Tetchy taking us through the papers. Can we talk drinks?
Yes.
Steph, this is in the Star this morning. Absolute sickos, they call people, who are ditching tea for lattes.
Apparently, we're no longer a nation of tea drinkers, and apparently 56% of the nation would either prefer coffee, espresso, cappuccino. And I'm not surprised, actually, because coffee helps people in the mornings, help them get their energy boost in the mornings.
It's not just tea.
No, it doesn't give you that kick, though, does it? Unless it's herbal tea. I'm an herbal tea drinker, and I find benefits from that.
So you have herbal tea. Fraser, what do you have?
Coffee. Sorry, I'm one of those traitors.
Yeah, me
that
too.
the
I am.
Star is prating about, I'm afraid.
face
I've
it,
let the side down here.
No. Well, I have coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
I have coffee in the morning and then tea the rest of the day. So I don't know, but I think it's a shame. We see you've got a passion for tea.
Yeah, there's still 100 million cups of tea being drank a day in the country.
So many offices have coffee machines now.
Yeah.
I think so, and so
They don't
many...
have tea machines in the same way, do they?
No, it's not the same.
No.
And so many coffee shops.
Yeah.
You know, it's just coffee. It's just a big part of the.
We've allowed
landscape.
coffee to infiltrate our culture.
We have. Yeah.
Coffee's just more trendy.
It's too late.
It is more trendy.
It's more trendy. Yeah, I'm getting my coffee in the morning all day.
People spend a fortune on it, though, which is weird.
Oh, it's ridiculously expensive.
It's hugely expensive.
Stupid.
Hugely expensive. Fraser, what's this about free schools? Well, I say free schools. It's all very confusing. Free schools. They're regulated differently, aren't they?
Yeah. So free schools are basically schools that members of the public or various people can sort of set up, but they will be given government funding. So they sit within the sort of education system. Now, there's a load of planned free schools that were signed off by the Conservative government, but the Labour government is now going to scrap them. It says it's going to use the money to deal with the crumbling buildings crisis.
Yeah.
But I think there's something deeper going on here. I think Labour has a bit of an ideological aversion to free schools. They opposed the free schools programme, when Michael Gove brought it in. But actually, it's probably one of the few things in the last 14 years that the Tories actually did well was the changing of the education system in England. The international rankings, we went up massively. We're now at number 11 in the PISA rankings in England. Whereas if you look at Labour-run Wales, it's actually fallen down the rankings. So some of these schools are really good. Famously, there's the Michaela School, which is the strictest school in Britain. It gets amazing GCSE results, despite being in a really poor part of London. There's another school that's always in the papers every year, Brampton Manor Academy in Newham. That sends more pupils to Oxbridge than Eton does, and it's a state school. It's a free school, but paid for by the state. So there are a lot of good free schools. There's a lot of bad free schools that are failing, but set up by people who don't know what they're doing. Often it's religious groups might set up a school, and they.
But this government's attitude will be very much that the state provides state schools and we should all go to them.
Absolutely, and also some of the changes that the government is making to the curriculum. They're saying free schools and academies would be able to have a bit of freedom around what they teach. Obviously, they still have the same exams.
Yeah.
That's going to be gotten rid of under the Labour government, so everyone will do the same curriculum.
All right, and there we must leave it, Fraser. Steph, thanks very much indeed. Here's your weather.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, storm actually could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places, the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up, we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many, it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the...
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning to you. Labour's war on working Brits.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to extend a freeze on income tax thresholds, and that could see millions of people newly dragged into higher tax brackets.
It all comes as the Chancellor is looking to bring in an extra £7 billion in revenue. But of course, the move raising questions about Labour's honesty on tax rises during the election.
The NHS, though, is promised billions in what's being called its biggest reform since 1948. But the health service chiefs admit productivity and public confidence have indeed plummeted.
The King and Queen are on their 6-day tour of Australia. They were greeted by both the country's Prime Minister and a torrential rainstorm. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is in Sydney.
Yes, the Queen joking she's brought the British weather with her on the tarmac at Sydney Airport, where Republican politicians were there to greet the King and Queen. But how are monarchists preparing for this 6-day royal tour?
As the US presidential election draws closer, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both hold rallies in the swing state of Michigan. But who came out on top?
Should we be teaching school children about British values? Well, the former Home Secretary, Lord Blunkett, thinks so, and he says we might live to regret it if we don't.
For many of us, a fine day today, but brewing out in the Atlantic, we have Storm Ashley. That's going to bring a wet and windy spell for all tomorrow, and for some, the winds could cause some problems. Join me later for a full forecast.
7 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Ann Diamond, and this is GB News Breakfast. And we haven't forgotten sport because Mark Foster is here to tell us what's going on. And a very warm welcome to you.
It's getting warmer here by the minute.
It's getting much warmer.
Yes, have you asked them to put the heating up?
Yeah.
Yes, we have.
In fact, somebody said, oh, Ann Diamond's back because she's already complaining about the chairs and the air conditioning.
No, that's
Has she been
true.
on holiday or on strike?
Is that one of our producers emailing?
It probably is.
Yeah. No, you've had a nice little break away. You need a break every now and then, don't you? You've got things to do and family to sort out and what
family
have
to
you.
visit and sunshine to enjoy.
Yes.
Because, oh, my goodness, I mean, everybody has said that to me today. Oh, you got a suntan, which is nice. Was it sunny? And yeah, it was sunny and it was lovely. And everybody then just goes, it's so long since we had the sun. And it has been a bit miserable here in the meantime, hasn't it?
Yeah, it feels like that at the moment.
But
It
I
really
read,
does. Oh, here we
while
go.
I was away, I read that we were going to have a sort of mini heat wave.
Oh, yes, we were meant to. In fact, Andrew Pearce told me the other day that it was going to be 25 degrees this weekend.
So when's that happen? No, it's not going to happen this weekend.
No, is it? It was raining this morning. I mean, it was warm rain.
Nice yesterday, though.
Well, it wasn't 25 degrees.
It wasn't.
Yeah, maybe not 18, maybe 17.
Yeah, it wasn't what you'd call a mini heat wave.
No.
Was it? It was just mild enough to go outside.
Well, I think it stopped raining at one point for me. But, I mean, that's as far as it went. It just goes to show, don't believe a word Andrew Pearce tells you.
Oh, you said it, I didn't. Absolutely.
Oh, I'd say it to his face.
Shall we press on?
I think we better add.
Yeah, I think we had before we get
he starts
into
messaging
trouble.
in.
Yeah.
He'll be WhatsApping in.
Please give Am Eamon's cushion to sit on. I'm sitting on two of them.
Sitting on
at
two?
the moment.
Yes.
That's not
Is
too
that
bad, is
better?
it? Yeah. It's
No,
like
you
climbing Everest to actually get into my chair now, but it is better, so I'll stop moaning.
Yes, right. Now, there's something to moan about. Millions of taxpayers could find themselves paying a higher rate of tax after the budget.
That's as the Chancellor prepares to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which Labour previously criticised, she did herself, as being a stealth tax.
Well, this comes as the NHS is expected to get billions of pounds in the budget after accepting it must make fundamental reforms to service.
Health bosses, however, have refused to promise that the cash will be enough to meet Labour's manifesto pledge of reducing waiting lists.
Let's talk to political commentator Theo Usherwood. Can we talk about the thresholds to begin with? And to clarify, if she freezes the income tax thresholds, that's not going to have an immediate impact, is it? That's taking us towards the end of this decade.
Yes, so the Tories had the freeze in place until 2028, and now we're looking at Rachel Reeves' plan to extend that to 2030, and that will mean an extra 400,000 will be paying into the basic rate of tax, and an extra 600,000 will be paying into higher and additional rates. Now, remember, higher rate kicks in at £50,000. The additional rate kicks in at 125,000. So more people paying more tax, and it's seen as a stealth tax. And Rachel Reeves and the Treasury is making the argument it doesn't break the Labour manifesto pledge because they're not increasing income tax. But
that's strictly true.
It is strictly true, but let me rewind you, of course, to last November, where, of course, and it's just worth just putting in there very quickly that Keir Starmer said he wouldn't increase taxes on working people. But when Rachel Reeves was asked about the freezing of income tax thresholds, the original decision by the Conservatives last November, she said people on average earnings are paying more in tax because they are dragged into higher tax brackets. That is a sign of failure. The government is picking the pockets of working people. So she clearly classes this decision, a decision to freeze income tax thresholds, as a way of taxing working people. And Keir Starmer was adamant and Rachel Reeves were adamant during the general election campaign that Labour would be not increasing taxes on working people.
We can moan as much as we like about that, though, and talk about whether it is her stealth tax and whether she is actually guilty of hypocrisy. But frankly, whatever she does, we will have to suffer.
Yes.
Until it comes to the next election, when we will have to judge them as to whether it's made a real difference and whether we feel any better about it. And that must be something they're taking into consideration.
That's absolutely right, Anne. I think the point is that what Labour want to do is they want to get the public finances on a better foot, spend money on the NHS, and to that end they're putting in an extra 2 to 3% over the next couple of years. That amounts to £10 billion. And the hope is that we are going to see the difference in the smaller class sizes, potentially. We're going to see the difference when it comes to shorter waiting times at A&E. We're going to see the difference when it comes to, other public services, prisons working, actually functioning. And actually the problem... and police officers on the street, antisocial behaviour is a major problem as well. And of course, the question mark will come, OK, we'll pay the higher tax now, but if people don't see that benefit, they don't see that uptick in public services come the next election, Labour could be paying a very, very high price at the ballot box.
You mentioned the NHS, as you say, sort of 10 billion or so over a period of time. For substantial reform, why do they need more money in order to reform?
Because
that would be my question.
I think it's a bit of a trade-off that's going on here. It's about saying to the NHS and to Amanda Pritchard, the Chief Executive of the NHS, if you do what we want you to do in terms of more preventative work to try and stop people developing, becoming obese, developing conditions like heart disease, and you do more preventative work to stop people getting in, finding themselves at the, requiring major surgery, long stays in hospital, then in return we're going to give you that extra money that you need for staffing to improve the shifts. And of course we've seen pay rises as well, which the NHS has benefited from, particularly junior doctors. And I think this is the government playing a trade-off. But it's worth mentioning that the NHS's problems are not just to do with the NHS, and that whilst the government is giving more money to the NHS, departments like Angela Rayner's department, she's the Deputy Prime Minister, which of course covers local government, are seeing cuts of up to 20%. And the reason I mention that is, of course, social care is absolutely intrinsic to making sure that people don't end up in hospital, or that people can be discharged from hospital. I mentioned earlier when I was I was in hospital and I was in A&E, and at the beginning of the process, I was sat next to a young man who'd been in A&E for 36 hours. At the end of the process, I was on a ward, a men's ward of 4 patients, 4 beds, and 2 of the beds were permanently occupied. Why? Because one of the men couldn't go home to his own home because the council hadn't turned up with a bed so he could be cared for at home. And the other gentleman who was on the bed next to me said that he had nowhere to be discharged to. He had no accommodation, no social housing. And so you effectively ended up with a ward just for 2 people. And actually, if the government's going to take away money from social care, it can't expect significant results in the NHS.
I mean, you think of previous mistakes that, or at least I would class it as a mistake, that were made, I don't know by which government, when they closed all the mental health hospitals and said we're going to replace it by something called care in the community, which will stop people having to go into hospital. Well, a fat lot of good that was. Yes. I don't know which government it was now.
I think that was the Tories, actually.
Could well have been. But I mean, this idea of hoping to stop people going into hospital in the first place needs to be proven, doesn't it?
Yes, and the point is that, there's no... I think it's slightly worrying in this conversation. There's talk about reform, there's talk about money, but we don't talk about the NHS in terms of what health officials like to describe as outcomes. Is the NHS making us better? Keir Starmer wants to go for economic growth, and the way to go for economic growth is to make sure that he has a fit and able population, and we now have 2.8 million people out of work on where sickness is a major problem, mental health problems are a major problem. And is the NHS, and the reason that he's, spoken about the NHS being absolutely crucial and the NHS getting more money being absolutely crucial, is that actually if it's functioning and it's making people better, then they're getting back into the workplace, and then you're reducing the welfare bill because people aren't claiming benefits and they're able to work and pay taxes. So the NHS is intrinsic to the Keir Starmer project to get the country back on its feet. But it's not just, I would argue, about giving more money to the NHS. It's about the organisations that support the NHS, like local authorities, which are responsible for adult and child social care as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, it's not to be fair to the government because they should have known all this. But the argument about social care and how it is integrated into the bigger picture has been going on for decades.
Forever.
And every government says they're going to tackle it.
And but this government delayed it. So we had Andrew Dildon's recommendations, and actually it got lost because we were all talking about the winter fuel allowance. But actually, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, in her statement going back to July, actually decided to scrap that plan where there was going to be a cap on costs for social care, £86,000, and they haven't yet come up with an alternative.
Well, you were saying earlier that we're being tested at the moment with lots of these. Will Rachel Reeves put a tax on this? Will she raise air duty so that all our airfares go up and things like that? We're being tested.
Well, it's public opinion is being tested, but I also think it's about the groups that represent particular public opinion, but it's also about the groups that represent, whether it's the airlines, whether it's motorists. And I pointed earlier to, the RAC Foundation, actually, which is very pro-motorist, I mean, it's there to represent drivers, has actually said, hang on a moment, with the fuel duty-frees, if you're going to lift that fuel duty-frees, it's been in place for 13 years under the last government, that may not be such a bad thing, because when there's a fuel duty-frees, who actually gets the difference? Who actually gets the difference? Is it does it filter its way down to the motorists, or is it the large petrol and diesel companies that, the large forecourt owners that actually make the money?
Oh, come on, any excuse to put the price up at the pump. Because the issue with that is, although, of course, we all think about, just getting on with our own little family lives, actually, it's those working people, those small businesses, those lorry drivers, all that, and that's where it hits.
100%, but it's about whether that then we see that rise at the pumps. And if people see another 7p on the litre, I'm a driver, I need my car, I need my car for my family. I'm all about that. Don't get me wrong, but it's about where, can that cost be absorbed by the companies, or actually are we going to see that filter down? And there's a question mark about that.
Yeah. OK. Theo, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Heck, it'd be very nice if the petrol companies absorb that cost.
Wouldn't it just?
Can't see it happening myself, but you never know. You never know. We shall have to wait and see. Right, let's talk about some happier news this morning, because the King and Queen have spent their first night in Australia as they embark on their royal tour of Sydney and the capital, Canberra.
Yes, their Majesties were welcomed to the country by the Australian Monarchist League, who plan to drum up more support for them down under.
Well, our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is live in Sydney for us this morning. Cameron, it's great to see you. So what is happening then on this first day?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty soggy reception, I think, perhaps on the tarmac, Stephen, with the torrential rainfall, the Queen joking that she brought the British weather with her when she arrived in Sydney last night. No engagements today. It's a rest day for the King and Queen. That's partly due to the King's cancer diagnosis, making sure he has enough energy to carry out those very public engagements. But the reason it was a bit of a soggy reception as well as the weather was because the politicians lined up on the tarmac, including the State Premier of New South Wales and the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, they are all Republicans. They don't want King Charles, ideally, as head of state, although there are no immediate plans to become a republic. The Republicans in Australia are calling it the farewell tour of Oz, but it's certainly not a priority for Anthony Albanese's government. And in fact, he had a cup of tea with the Queen and the King following that airport arrival last night, and he released a statement saying that their Majesties have a deep regard with Australia, and this visit will be an opportunity to showcase the very best of our modern and dynamic nation. And as you said, I spent the morning, well, my morning, your middle of the night, with the Australian Monarchist League, and they told me what they thought, how they thought the trip was going to be going.
As you can see here, the Australian Monarchist League is out in full force celebrating what is a momentous occasion. I think the tour is going to go really well. We're very optimistic, and at the end of the day, it's a reminder of the significance of our system and just how wonderful it is for this country.
Well, tomorrow the King and Queen will be visiting a church where Australian people in Sydney are going to have an opportunity to meet their Majesties outside that church service. And then, of course, there are several other engagements planned for today, but not without some small protests.
They always say, though, don't they, Cameron, that that the Australian Republicans have their feelings about the monarchy until they meet them, until they actually meet them, and then they usually are bowled over. I wonder if they'll have that effect.
Well, I think quite possibly, Anne. I mean, if you just take the Republican politicians lined up on the tarmac last night, they were all smiles, weren't they? And they appeared to be having a pretty warm reception with His Majesty the King. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, inviting them back for a cup of tea as well. Very warm, very understanding. The King and Queen released a statement when they were on the flight from Singapore yesterday, saying they have a really warm regards for the people of Australia and want to be meeting as many different communities as possible. And from those Australians who I've spoken to over the last 24 hours or so who have had the opportunity their Majesties or have experienced time with their Majesties, they all talk about just how personable, how down-to-earth the King and Queen can be. So perhaps it will have the opportunity to drum up more support perhaps for a monarchy in Australia, but it's up to the Australian people really to decide.
Every time they go, they have the amazing effect. And King Charles himself, when he was Prince Charles, when he was very young, sort of frolicking in the surf with lots of lovely ladies all around him, he has a very good relationship and always has had with Australia, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, those pictures of him in the surf, yeah, from many years ago. The King has visited Australia officially 15 times during the course of his life. This is the 16th visit, but of course the first as monarch. Then there was the visit in the 1980s with Diana, Princess of Wales, where perhaps Diana got all the attention, but I think the attention is very much back on King Charles and Queen Camilla here. So it can, you know, it's got a very long relationship, I think, the King with Australia, and I think he really wants to. He was really determined to come here to Australia because, of course, his cancer diagnosis meant there was a huge question mark over whether he'd make the trip.
How important is it for his reign, do you think, Cameron, that he is being seen out and about on a major tour on the other side of the planet? I mean, slightly pared back it may be because of the cancer diagnosis. However, it's been such a quiet couple of years, understandably. How important is it that he is now being seen to be out and about?
Well, I think it's incredibly symbolic, Stephen. The reason being is this is the first visit of King Charles to a realm where he is still reigning as head of state. Of course, the coronavirus pandemic meant that senior members of the royal family could not travel to many of the realms, and we had quite a disastrous visit of the Prince and Princess of Wales to the Caribbean back in 2021, which didn't go down very well at all. So I think King Charles will be aware of the optics around how the royal family is perceived by various fractions within Australia. He will be focused on highlighting causes close to his heart, climate change, cancer research and the like. The Queen similarly with tackling domestic violence and children's literacy. But in terms of the wider issue when it comes to the monarchy in Australia, it's not a priority for the government, and it is hoped from speaking to people in Australia, a younger generation of royals, the Prince and Princess of Wales, will return to Australia one day. So although Republicans dubbing it the farewell tour of Oz, there's certainly no plans for it to be so.
Good.
What do you think of the place, Cameron? I mean, where you are now has to be one of the most spectacular places on the planet. What do you think of it?
I mean, it's beautiful, Anne. I'm still slightly jet-lagged. I'm also losing my voice, but the scenery is spectacular. I mean, Sydney Opera House behind me. There's also, well, you can't quite see the bridge from here. I wish the weather was slightly more sunny, to be perfectly honest. It was biblical rainfall last night when the King and Queen arrived. I got very wet, but the rain is just about holding off for now. It's still incredibly warm, though, when it does rain, so it's not like rain in the UK.
Oh, Cameron, honestly, you'll have the time of your life
I'm
over
crying
there.
my eyes out looking at it. It just looks absolutely spectacular. You have to pinch yourself the first time you ever see the Opera House, because you've only ever seen it, you know, in books in school, and then you're there, and oh, Cameron, what a wonderful job.
It's like it's like going to New York, isn't it, and seeing the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty and all that. You just think, wow.
You think, oh, you can't believe it.
Lovely. I mean, Good old Cameron. He'll be having a whale of a time
really
out
will.
there. It's an
It's-
experience.
Absolutely. And the weather, I'm sure, will cheer up. John has been in touch, says if I could live my life over again and the government gave me a resettlement grant, I would go to Australia at the drop of a hat. It is a spectacular place. Yeah. I used to, when I went out there several times, we used to live on the other side of from the Opera House. So to get over to main Sydney, you just catch the ferry in the morning and you go past the Opera House and the bridge, the Sydney Harbour Bridge every day. And one of the most beautiful places in the world.
When I retire...
Happy day, everybody watching in Australia.
Yeah,
when you retire...
When I retire, I will go out there for a month or two.
Yeah. The only problem with Australia is it's so far away from Britain and that you get the feeling... I think a lot of people would love to maybe retire there or go and live there, but it takes you away from a lot of your family.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're half a world away.
I wouldn't want to live there.
And one of the reasons I was terribly tempted to stay and have my family there, but as so many people said to me, the trouble is once they grow up and they get to, you know, teenage or university years, they want to go to Europe, and then you lose your kids to Europe.
Yeah.
So then you find yourself moving back.
Well, we have lots of them over here.
Yeah, we
don't we?
do.
Always have a lot of Australians.
Anyway, if
in
you're
the UK.
watching us from Australia today, get in touch, please. Love to hear from you.
gbnews.com/yoursay. It's 7:21. Let's have a look at some of the other key stories this morning.
Well, the pop star Cheryl Cole has paid tribute to Liam Payne following the 31-year-old's death on Wednesday night. Cheryl, who of course shares a 7-year-old son, Bear, with Liam, wrote on Instagram describing his death as earth-shattering, and she reminded the public that he was not only a star, but a son, a brother, an uncle, a dear friend, and a father.
A former police detective has been jailed for 19 years for stealing £400,000 worth of cocaine from work to sell on the streets of Manchester. Anthony Talbot found guilty of misconduct in public office and supplying Class A drugs last month.
And Sir Keir Starmer has agreed a Rwanda-style deal to send migrants who arrive on the Chagos Islands to St Helena, which is another British sovereign territory in the Atlantic Ocean. It sparked backlash from MPs, with many still angry about the Prime Minister's decision to sign away the islands back to Mauritius.
Right, we may not have Australia warmth here, but it's better than it has been in the last week. Let's get the details from Alex Deakin.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, Storm Ashley could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Now, would you like to get your hands on £36,000 in tax-free money? If you do, you've got to get a bit of a wriggle on because the lines close next Friday. Here's how you can enter.
This is the final week to grab your...
Good luck indeed, and tax-free, while tax-free still exists in this country anywhere.
Not for long.
No.
Not for long. Still to come, should we be teaching British values in schools? We'll debate that next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Earlier this week, Olympic swimmer Adam Peaty finally proposed to his girlfriend, because I've been waiting for this, the daughter of Gordon Ramsay, with a gorgeous yellow diamond ring.
Yeah, so the demand for coloured diamonds in the last 10 years has soared by, guess how much, 77% between 2010 and 2019. Joining us now to tell us more about some of the hottest trends in the diamond world is dealer to the stars, Neil Dutson. Good morning, Neil. Morning, Ben. And I've got one of your exemplary examples. Look at this bad boy.
So
What's this one?
That's a very rare Muso Colombian emerald. And it's alpine green translucent, so it's a really stunning
See if
colour.
we get a close-up.
So, yeah, so pretty impressive.
Can I be very crude and ask how much this is worth?
So value is £200,000.
How much, sorry?
£200,000. Now, the reason is its rarity. It's minor oiling. It's very, very, very pretty. The two diamonds on the side are D-colour, flawless diamonds, just to accentuate the setting.
Neil, how did you get into diamonds?
I studied diamonds in Antwerp. So Antwerp used to be the diamond capital of the world, really. Yeah. 85% of the world's diamonds go through Antwerp, or used to. And now Dubai has taken over. And yeah, I just went to a school there. I learnt about diamonds, and I just didn't want to be seen off in the future.
Neil, I'm very concerned I'm going to drop 200 grams worth of diamonds into my cup of tea, so can I give that back to you?
Absolutely.
But I can hold one if you like.
Oh, well, I've got
Neil.
a lovely one here.
Thank you.
So this is a fancy vivid yellow. It's 8 carats.
This is my dream ring, just so you know, for this hand. This would be
Is it big
amazing.
enough?
So what would I call this? A yellow?
So that's a natural fancy vivid yellow diamond. Value £300,000. So,
it fits
depends
like
where
a
you're
glove.
buying it from.
It fits like a glove, Neil.
Oh.
Maybe it's a sign. It's meant to be mine.
Definitely a sign, yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there again, and good morning or good day if you're watching from Australia, which lots of people are. Alicia Griffiths has already been in touch. Hi, Alicia. Saying, hi, Stephen and Anne. My name is Alicia, and I'm originally from Colchester, but I've been living in Australia for 16 years. I live on the beautiful Gold Coast, and I watch GB News every day. You must come to visit the Goldie. It's the most beautiful place on earth.
Well, if you'll put us up...
And then there's one there.
Oh, John... says, I'm watching you from Melbourne, expat the UK, 17 years he's been there, and I watch GB News every day to catch up on what's going on up there. Judging by the news, I'm glad I moved down here. Yes, well...
and there's one more, and I like this one. This is from Joy Riley. Hello, Anne and Stephen. I live in Western Australia. I'm an ex-Brit. I still have family in the UK. The way we cope with the distance, we think it's only a day away.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
nice,
it's a
isn't
good way
it?
of thinking about it, isn't it? I suppose that's true in this modern age. Well, lucky old you three being down there. But, you know, so invitations for us to come and visit you. would be very welcome.
We'll try and talk the bosses into sending us to Australia for a special.
Yeah, good luck.
Special week.
Good luck. You can do the chatting on that one.
Yeah, we'll give it a go.
Right, let's talk about British values. I wonder if they uphold British values in Australia. Mind you, it's not too different down there, is it? But Labour peer Lord Blunkett, of course, former Labour Home Secretary, has proposed that British values must be taught in schools, saying the UK will regret it if we don't do it.
Difficult thing to teach, though, don't you think? Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
Depends what do you mean? What do you mean by far-right ideologies as well in all of this? It all gets a bit confusing anyway. So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do we even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Thank you both for joining us. In fact, one of our viewers, Elaine, puts it this way. She says, should we teach British values in schools? Should this even be a question? It's a tragedy that we even have to, because it should be in our DNA. Is it still in our DNA? Chris McGovern.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are. There's nothing much to criticise when you think about how the government defines British values: democracy, liberty, mutual respect. These are values which are pretty fundamental in Western societies. And we have to remember, we live at the time when around the world those sorts of values are being undermined, and we shouldn't undermine them for ourselves. So we need to be proud. We need to understand that it's not all great in British history and British identity. We need to be proud. There are some dangers in teaching British values, and people will disagree about what they are. But look, I'm proud to be British, and we as a country should be like other countries, proud to be what we are.
Yeah, I mean, look, as Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. You know, like Chris, and I hope like both of you and everyone watching who is British, I'm very, very proud to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
But obviously not, Matthew. I mean, that wouldn't happen. When you say, for example, rule of law is a British value, well, that should be taught. Perhaps the youth would benefit from that, because you see what's happening on the streets and knife crime and all this sort of thing. Perhaps actually that's what should be getting instilled in schools.
Well, you talk about the rule of law, but remember that the last Conservative government was considering breaking international law. So then you'd have the absurd situation where children were being taught to respect the rule of law, but the government of the day was thinking about breaking the law. So it all gets very, very tricky.
Yeah, isn't that the problem, Chris? You've got to first of all decide, and who decides, what British values are. There's never going to be a consensus on that, is there?
Well, there are going to be different opinions, but actually the government has defined what British values are, and schools are required to teach them. Lord Blunkett's wishing to entrench that more firmly. I mean, democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and respect for other people's points of view. Those are British values as defined by the government. I don't have any problems with those, except that on occasion, and I think it's worth pointing this out, that sometimes British values can go wrong. For example, we might say that it's important to understand the point of view of other people. Yes, it is, but I recall when the police and the special branch went into the school in the East End of London to check out those girls who'd gone to Syria. They wanted to find out whether the school was promoting extreme views, Islamic views in this case, and the school got a clean bill of health. But the reason why it got a clean bill of health was because the school was actually teaching that all points of view are equal. So the point of view of President Bush over the 9/11 and the point of view of Osama bin Laden were different but equal. That's the danger of British values, because all views aren't equal. I don't think. I didn't think the terrorist view is equal to the view of the victim. There's a problem there. But I think Lord Blunkett's raising a debate. We need to discuss it. We need to hang together as a society. We saw in Yugoslavia some years ago how a society can fragment. We have to have shared values for the majority. There'll always be people who won't agree, of course, but we have to promote an idea of national identity and getting together and sharing our values. For most people, there will always be dissidents.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, Matthew, is it? In terms of if you take a broad overview of things, if you didn't call it teaching British values, but you sort of were working towards a national unity, a national cohesion, then that wouldn't be bad, would it?
I think national cohesion, national unity are really important. I'm someone who goes to as many England football, cricket and rugby games as I'm lucky enough to attend, and I have my fist on my chest and sing the national anthem with great pride. So sport can be a way to achieve that. But I'm just a little bit worried that this could end up in it becoming one of those culture wars where I'm all for discussing this. It's a great conversation to be having this morning, but a culture war where we have great debate about what exactly British values are, and we start to trip ourselves up on that. Look, if Lord Blunkett is basically saying we need to make sure that children emerge from school not subscribing to extremist ideologies, well, then I'm 100% behind him on that. We want no extremism in our schools or indeed in adulthood at all in this country. I'm just not sure that forcing so-called British values down the throats of children is a particularly constructive idea.
OK, there we've got to leave it. Matthew Stadlen, Chris McGovern, thank you very much indeed. You can let us know what you think, gpnews.com/yoursay.
And you might have said years ago you didn't have to worry about whether schools should be teaching it, parents should be teaching it. But then nowadays, would you ever get different sets of parents to agree on what their British values are?
No, but I do think as well, society does seem more divided now, and you go to various towns and cities, and they're physically divided into cohorts. You go somewhere and it's English people, you go somewhere else and it's Polish people.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, that's not integration, and that's not. You need to at least create some sort of cohesion amongst the youth. It's not to discriminate against anyone. It's just to say, well, let's all try and follow a similar plan, similar path.
Yeah, I think
forward.
if you come and live in Britain, you should want to be British. Shouldn't you?
I don't think that's unreasonable.
Mm.
But anyway, let us know what you think. We've got the sport heading away in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We shouldn't have to do this, Rebecca. These men should have been compensated long ago.
They shouldn't have to fight for recognition. And this is what's happened over the last 72 years. So all the way through from the test through to the present day, they've known that something happened to them. They've seen what they've been through, their medical conditions, the fact that many of these servicemen died well before their time. And they were ignored in a way that other countries didn't ignore their similar testing veterans. So other nuclear powers across the world, the US, for example, compensated and recognised their nuclear testing veterans many, many years ago. Yet, unfortunately, successive governments in the UK failed to do that. After the long campaign for medallic recognition, finally, these servicemen received medallic recognition, but it came in a jiffy bag in the post, which is not the way to honour the service that these men gave to our country. There needs to be an understanding and an uncovering of the truth of what they actually went through. They've been fighting for many years for access to their medical records, for example, urine and blood tests that they know were taken during their service. But when many of these families have tried to access their records, these test results seem to be missing, and there's no explanation as to why this has happened.
What basis does the Ministry of Defence say it's not our responsibility?
Well, we know from other studies across the world and subsequent studies, it showed, staggeringly that these men were exposed to the same amount of radiation as clean-up workers at Chernobyl.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Olympian broadcaster. It's not often you say that, is it? Mark Foster is here with us to do the sport. And a very good morning to you. It's lovely to be able to say that, isn't it?
Well, you're saying it, I'm just...
You're being it.
Well,
that's even better.
Yeah.
Right, shall we start talking football? And something... We were talking earlier about how you only talk the Olympics once every 4 years or so, but you talk football all
every day.
the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And we're talking about the new England manager.
Yep.
And how the news is going down with everybody.
It's not gone down very well, and I just think, is it just because he's German or because he's foreign? We've had foreign managers in the past, Sven-Göran Eriksson and Capello. So, for me, it's more down to the results he gets than it is his nationality. Yeah.
Well, we have a very long memory when it comes to football and the Germans, don't we?
Yeah, but
that memory goes right back.
But then is it just because he's German? If it was Pep Guardiola and he was Spanish...
Yeah, I don't think we'd care enough.
No, I think it is because he's German.
Yeah, it's this horrible rivalry, isn't it? It's all to do with the war, basically.
But then if in 2 years' time he lifts the World Cup, will you go, yeah, but we've got a German manager? Or will you go, we won the World Cup?
No, of course not, because everyone's fickle like that, aren't they? But I think it's all very odd that we are so fickle over it all. Can we talk America's Cup?
Yeah.
Because we had real hope when we were 4-0 down, then we went to 4-2. Now we're at 6-2 trailing New Zealand.
Yeah, lost the last two races yesterday. No, it's first to 7, best out of 13. 5 more races to go, 2 today, 2 tomorrow, and then 1 on Monday. If it goes that far.
Yeah, if they win one, it all just stops. So.
Presumably. I don't know the answer to that. I can check it out for you. But I've got a feeling... Well, it's over, isn't it?
It's over.
Result's over. But do they play the rest of the matches out? I don't know. It's... I mean, New Zealand have been dominant. Ben Ainsley's talked about they're as dominant as the All Blacks, and that is a dominant team. But I guess the bottom line is every time they go... It's like me, every time you get on the block or every time you get on the starting line, you've got a chance. So they might have to win 5 on the trot, but they've still got a chance.
I mean, is there any critical reason that we're not doing so well? Because clearly, I mean, the guys in charge of the boat are champions themselves.
True.
So, I mean, why aren't we doing better? Is there a reason for it? Is it just bad luck?
I wouldn't say it's bad luck. It's probably more to do with the dominance of the other team. I think you sometimes just get a team or a skipper on that team that does things a little bit better. So I don't know enough about boats to know whether... You've seen it historically in Formula One that certain cars have been better than other cars. So, for argument's sake, if you put Lewis Hamilton, when he was winning his Formula One Grand Prix, in a Force India car, which tends to be at the bottom of the grid, would he have been able to win? No. So it's more down to the car. So is their boat just that little bit better?
But see, this is the first time...
I wouldn't have thought so.
This is the first time we've competed since 1964.
Actually made the final part,
Final two, 1964. So actually, we've done very well.
Done well to get there in the first place.
Yeah.
60... 60 years ago.
That's a long time.
So why don't we have the same thought process when it comes to football like that? We've done really well.
Yeah, we should do, shouldn't we?
We've done well. We're in the World Cup.
Oh, dear.
All right, well, we'll just have to look forward to the next America's Cup. How often is it held?
Every 3 or 4 years.
OK.
Anyway, 1964.
Big hopes for the next one.
Yeah. Right, let's have a quick look at F1, should we? Because it's looking... I mean, it's looking like Verstappen is going to get the title.
It looks like he's going to get the title. There's another 6 races to go, although Lando Norris over the last 4 races has taken 24 points off Verstappen. So he's 52 points behind with 6 races to go. It's mathematically possible that he could still win the championship. But that's also hoping the other drivers will get in between him and Verstappen. Hopefully Verstappen will crash, and he's got to consistently win. So he's up against it, but it is possible.
All right, we've got to leave it there, Mark. Tight for time. Thank you very much indeed. Lando Norris, I always think he was in Star Wars, but that's...
It does sound like that, yes, it does.
Lando
it's a good name.
Calrissian, wasn't it? Right, we're going to go through the papers for you in just a moment.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
National Trust Director General has said something rather curious. She's admitted that 70% of the charity's staff are Union Jack-hating progressive activists. Yes, this was speaking at a Labour Party fringe event. The boss of the charity, Hilary McGrady, acknowledged that there was a gap between her staff's views and the views held by the wider public. So was she being honest? Joining me now to discuss this is historian and broadcaster Rafe Hadelman-Koo, who I believe is with me. Rafe, thank you very much indeed. Can this be true?
The founders of the National Trust and later figures involved in it, like my hero James Lees Milne, were really motivated by love of nation. But I think that love of nation in the Trust has become actively, national self-loathing. And that's really the state of modern Britain. And with the Trust, I mean, what we've done is we've actually entrusted our national heritage to those people who actually actively despise our national heritage. And it's, it's utter madness.
Have these people wanted to take over charities like the National Trust for their political ends, or is it just something that happens? Is it just the type of people who work in charities?
This has been part of the long march through the institutions, that people need to understand that Britain is now a post-revolutionary society. So the buildings that house our institutions look the same, but the people who now run them bear no comparison to the generations who lovingly built and ran them. They are cuckoos in the nest, and we need to understand that. And of course, once you realize that, of course, that explains completely why, the National Trust and others have crudely tried to denigrate our national heroes and link them and their houses to colonialism and slavery, as they ludicrously tried to do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, let's have a look at the papers with Fraser Myers and Stephanie Tecci. What should we kick off? Oh, let's talk about pubs, Steph.
Pubbies.
It's in the Metro.
Yeah, well, we think pubs are a stable part of British life, but experts are saying they are steadily declining, which we've been talking about for a while, but they're saying by 2074 there may be less than 1,000 pubs in the country.
That's ridiculous.
Well, it says that each decade they're being halved due to closure, and people are just being turned off pubs. They're saying, experts are saying, pubs need to offer more than just drink and food. There needs to be some unique experiences. I don't know. I think, you know, people who like going to pubs like pubs for the social aspects and just getting a drink, but it seems like they're being urged to become a bit more fancy and offer something unique to keep them alive. But the real thing is pubs are closing because they just don't have enough money to keep them open. It's not that people are not interested in them anymore. It's just that the cost of, you know, bills, running the pubs, getting the drinks in, that's why they're closing. I don't think it's the British public.
It would be turning them all into family pubs, which drives me mad.
Yeah, I mean, the pubs have had a horrendous couple of decades, even going right from, you know, you think the smoking ban, then COVID, then the energy crisis, and I'm sure, you know, alcohol duty will probably go up in Rachel Reeves' budget. And it just feels like, you know, no one has decided to declare war on the pub deliberately, but it feels like there's a perfect storm that is bringing them down. And, you know, as you say, it would be nice if they were cheaper rather than, I don't want to see more fancy things. I'd like them to do what they do, but for a more reasonable price. And in London, you know, when you're paying upwards of £7 a pint, you can see why people can't make, you know, people don't have regulars anymore. Why it isn't simply, you know, it's a treat rather than just simply a part of your routine.
You want to go down your local, you always know someone in there, and have a bit of a chinwag and a pint and
Absolutely, and they're just such a core part of, you know, the community, really. You know, you think about all the people who might be lonely or whatever, the pub is a key part of their lives, but they're sort of now, unfortunately, with the nanny state and everything, seen as, you know, place where people go to drink and smoke and be unhealthy, but actually, you know, we lose a lot more if the pubs go away.
Well, it's meant to be one of the healthiest ways to drink, isn't it? Because
absolutely,
because you're with others, and there's a landlord keeping an eye on things. Whereas if you buy your booze from a supermarket and drink at home, that's a less healthy way to drink, and you're going to probably end up drinking more.
Well, yeah, I stopped drinking during the pandemic because I was scared that I was going to end up drinking more at home, where in social situations I'm much more controlled. But I think in general in this country we just have too much choice for entertainment, more than pubs. There's so many bars, clubs, and I think with Gen Z as well, they're more on this kind of trend where they're not drinking as much. So I don't feel like pubs appeal to
there is a change.
We do need to teach the younger generation, actually. Because I went to... Last time I was in a pub a couple of weeks ago, and I walked up to the bar and I got told off by some young people because they'd formed a queue. And they were saying, no, it's a queue. And I was like, it's a bar.
No, you're absolutely in the right. And there's a Twitter account that shows pictures of these queues forming at bars. No. It's absolutely outrageous. I don't know if it's a post-pandemic trend, but it's got to stop because it's actually bad for the bar staff as well. They know what they're doing. They know who's next. And it's nice for people to bunch at the bar,
So did you have to go to the back of the queue?
No, I refused.
Oh, good for you.
Are you sure these people in the hadn't already ordered what they wanted on the nap?
No,
because you can then sit at your sit at your table and have things brought to you that way. But no more queues in pubs. Maybe that's why.
Ridiculous. If you ever do that, hang your head in shame. Shouldn't be allowed in a pub.
Maybe it's the way of the world. It's the changing way that we consume.
Don't like it. Don't like it. Anyway, look, thank you both. Catch up with you a little bit later on.
Here's Alex Deakin with your weather.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, storm actually could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many, it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Days, good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catherine Richards and Jake Singleton-Hill featured on the reality show Love is Blind.
Well, Catherine and Jake are joining us now in the studio for Saturday Morning Live. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is perhaps not the end result that people might have thought that they'd be seeing at this point, because you were both on the show, but you didn't fall in love in the pods, did you?
No, we didn't. I rejected him.
You guys look great together.
Yeah.
Very, very happy as well. It seemed like you guys were really strong, and it almost seemed like Freddie, after he admitted to you that he'd cheated in the past.
I actually respected the fact that he told me up front. I didn't even want to have that conversation, obviously. That was a conversation that we got told to talk about. And I respected his decision, but I think he felt that I was holding this grudge towards him that she really doesn't like, and which was not, and he knew this, because off camera we had many conversations where I was like, thank you for owning up, like, we can just move on from this. But if anything, I think he just felt guilty the whole entire time, and he put that on me, which is fine, but yeah, there's obviously a lot that people don't see.
So for viewers who don't know, Love is Blind is where you go and seek love and romance, but you don't see who you're speaking to, right?
No.
So, Jake, why did you go on the show?
My parents actually met in a very similar way. So my stepdad was texting my mum. He'd basically stolen the number off of a friend because the friend had met my mum in Blackpool, and they were texting for like 6 months. They'd never met. So that premise of how they got together and the marriage that they had was stunning. And to build a relationship not based on looks before you met, I just found that just incredible.
So do you believe in that concept? Is it lust or love at first sight?
It's weird.
It's a bit of both.
I think, it's definitely a bit of both. And I always say, as you get older, your looks will change, but your personality will stay the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning to you. Labour's war on working Brits.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is set to extend a freeze on income tax thresholds, which could apparently see millions of people dragged into higher tax brackets.
Well, this comes as the Chancellor is apparently looking to bring in an extra $7 billion in revenue. But, of course, the move raising questions about Labour's honesty on tax rises during the election.
Meanwhile, the NHS has been promised billions in what's being called its biggest reform since 1948. But health service chiefs admit productivity and public confidence has indeed plummeted.
Now, the King and Queen are on their 6-day tour of Australia. They were greeted by the country's Prime Minister, but also a torrential rainstorm. Braving it all is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker.
Yes, the Queen joking she brought the British weather down under on the tarmac at Sydney Airport yesterday as Republican politicians were there to greet the King and Queen. But how have royal fans been preparing for this royal tour?
As the US presidential election draws closer, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both hold rallies in the swing state of Michigan. But who came out on top?
And should we be teaching school children about British values? The former Home Secretary, Lord Blunkett, thinks so. He says we might live to regret it if we don't.
For many of us, a fine day today, but brewing out in the Atlantic, we have Storm Ashley. That's going to bring a wet and windy spell for all tomorrow, and for some, the winds could cause some problems. Join me later for a full forecast.
It's just gone 8 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is GB News Breakfast.
And bringing us all the sport this morning, Mark Foster, that man who does all the swimming, is here. Good morning.
Yeah, I'm on dry land now.
You're on dry land. Is it odd being on? I often wonder when you've had a career, you know, and as you have, and being an Olympian and all the rest of it. Is it odd when that comes to an end? Because you'll retire from your sports at a very early age.
Recreate yourself and do something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like Premier League football where you've got a fortune in the bank and you can either just sit back and play golf or, I guess, invest in different businesses. When I swam at an early age, there was no money in sport, so I worked as a career driver, fitted double glazing windows, groundsman, lifeguard, did lots of jobs. Yeah.
There's a life skill there. You could fall back on it at any point.
I could. I used to lift plasterboards around on the building site, and I actually I think the stupid thing is, not the stupid thing is, I really enjoyed doing stuff where I just move.
Yeah.
And I worked in a council office once where I sat at a desk and I was not very good at school. Maybe that's why I was a good sportsman. I wasn't very good at sitting still. I needed to move. But when I was competing, I never thought about, OK, what's going to happen after? It was more about focusing on the here and the now. And when it finished, it's OK, what we're going to do now, sort of thing.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what sparked my interest in that is I've got a double glazing pane that's blown. Needs replacing.
Well, to be fair, I was only used to fit in single pane windows.
Oh, come on, you can give it a whirl.
I'm joking.
You'll have more of an idea than I do.
I'm joking, sorry.
Right, consider yourself booked for Monday. Excellent, Mark. We'll see you a little bit later on.
Thank you.
Now, millions of us who are taxpayers could find ourselves paying a higher rate of tax after the budget.
That's as the Chancellor prepares to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which Labour previously, actually, only a year ago, criticised as being a stealth tax.
Well, the NHS, meanwhile, is going to get more money. Apparently, billions of pounds in the budget after accepting it must make fundamental reforms to the service.
The bosses inside the health service, however, have refused to promise that the amount of cash being promised to them is enough to meet Labour's manifesto pledge of reducing waiting lists.
Let's join us, head to Torquay, and joining us live is former Minister for Immigration, Kevin Foster. Good to see you this morning. I'm totally confused by all of this. We've no money. We're desperately trying to raise money, and yet we're spending more money on the NHS. What is going on with this?
Well, I think we're seeing quite a few contradictions from the current government. It's worth remembering they had access to finances and detailed briefings from civil servants from about February onwards. It's common for opposition parties before the main opposition party, I should say, before a general election to have an opportunity to get an insight into where the government is in a confidential level as well as what we'd see published. So it's quite interesting to contrast some of the pleas that the government is absolutely desperate for cash with things like the inflation-busting pay rises we've seen in terms of the public sector, and now some of this. And some of the arguments around the NHS, yes, there's a need to modernise facilities. A few of us are going to argue with that. But there is a need to say, well, hang on, if they got back to the productivity there was before the pandemic, that would be worth actually a multi-billion pound funding rise anyway.
I mean, what is your feeling on all of this? So many people have got different opinions about Keir Starmer's first 100 days. It clearly hasn't been plain sailing, as he sort of himself admitted. Are you amused by it or desperate about it as a former, for instance, Minister for Immigration?
Well, I'm never going to be amused by a situation where we see the numbers crossing the channel going up, where we see serious questions being asked about judgment around giving away sovereign territory. With a very interesting now development there that apparently whilst sending people thousands of miles to Rwanda was wrong, it's very reasonable to send them from the Chagos Islands to St Helena in the Atlantic. So, again, thousands of miles. So it's been, I think, some conservatives may take a bit of, sort of schadenfreude from seeing Labour politicians who are very keen to attack others on certain points, then suddenly having no opinion on them when confronted with some of their own team's behaviour. But look, we shouldn't be taking any pleasure from this. At the end of the day, this 100 days was a result of, in many ways, our failure on issues, and with a dire campaign in June, July for the election. You know, we still need to reflect long and hard on why voters did not trust us and didn't wish to see us carrying government before we get to the next election in at least which is at least 3.5 years away.
Yeah, we've got to... I mean, there's a sense the grass always seems greener, doesn't it? But I just wonder, someone got in touch this morning and saying, well, look at this, Rishi Sunak said this would happen with taxes all going up and what have you. The problem is, if the Conservatives had won... I mean, the IFS certainly said the taxes would have had to have gone up anyway. The illegal immigration figures would have continued anyway, probably, at least for a period of time. It's actually very difficult to compare and contrast, isn't it, as to what would have happened if we'd had a different result at the election.
Well, there's always the argument of what if, and we can argue that for a long period of time. Although things like scrapping Rwanda on the first day you walk in office, just before the summer, which is the main arrival period for small boats, was inevitably going to have an impact. And then when you combine that with talk about fast processing, better known as getting the rubber stamp out on a backlog, the rubber stamps that's marked approved, not removed, was likely to have an impact on small boat arrival numbers. But yes, I think we'd set out some of the decisions we'd have to take. Labour had made all sorts of promises and perhaps tried to avoid saying much about what they'd actually do, and now people are seeing what's happened. And I think the other thing, certainly one thing Labour will now be reflecting on is a Halloween budget day might seem very clever when they were thinking about, well, hang on, we do it the Wednesday, the 30th of October. That's about the very last day we can do it with Rishi Sunak responding before a new Conservative leader comes in. Instead, what it's done is it's created nearly 4 months of government ministers having to say, well, you'll see in the budget. Speculation about tax rises, which doesn't go into a vacuum. When media are reporting tax rises potentially going to happen, people don't sit there who might have to pay those taxes and say, oh, well, that'll be a shame. What they actually do is they start working to plan in terms of how they might avoid that liability. For example, moving asset abroad, selling a house or a share portfolio now before capital gains tax might go up at the end of this month. So actually, they could end up having to make choices they wouldn't have had to make, but for all the speculation that's been going on. Even at a more minor level, people buying fuel in the run-up to the budget, something we always used to do, and now sounds like you'll have to do, or a very good idea to do, this year. So there's a sense that the first 100 days has not been the sign of a government with a big majority confidently getting on with its agenda. In fact, quite the opposite.
Can I just ask about St Helena? Because so many people, when they first read about it, that had been mentioned, had to look it up and try and find out where it is. Did you... but it is a British territory, a British overseas territory, isn't it? So I suppose it's very easy to class it as a safe place to take people, to take migrants or immigrants. Did you ever look at it?
Well, there were discussions about whether we looked at some of our overseas territories, but the issue is some of them have very small populations, including St Helena. Others are places where if we did try and move larger numbers of people in, we would actually be spending quite a lot of money creating the infrastructure to support. For example, places like the Falklands have only about 4,000 permanent residents. So suddenly bringing in quite a number of people, migrants, would not, would quite change the community there, quite dramatically, in fact, and create big then issues about actually the logistics of supporting that sort of growth. Whereas someone like Rwanda is a specialist in resettlement, had worked with the UNHCR, is a larger country. It was certainly more infrastructure than small overseas territories with a more limited population. So it was something that was certainly considered as part of the options we looked at, but we concluded that actually just basically the pure logistics of shifting people to some of these territories and the then knock-on effects of that made it something that actually looking at dealing with someone like Rwanda was a better option. And actually, we're now seeing European countries wanting to work with Rwanda. So as Keir and Labour scrapped it, others were inspired by it.
Yeah, just a very quick final thought before we let you go. Bearing all of this in mind, who's going to be the best person to be leader of the opposition?
Well, look, we saw on the GB News debate two really strong candidates. Kemi pushing her manifesto and Robert Jones putting his. As a former immigration minister, I did vote with Robert. I listened to what he said. He's quite detailed analysis on immigration. But I think either of the two final candidates is someone that Conservative Party members can be proud of. They've got a good choice of people for their vote. And then we all need to, on the 2nd of November, get behind whoever wins. We've got to end all the backstabbing and arguing that we saw at Westminster, as all that does is mean you potentially get another 5 years of Keir Starmer.
That's a very politician's answer, Kevin, but I'll let you off.
We expect more of you.
Yes, we do.
Well, I said how I voted. I voted for Rob, so that's the one I voted for.
There you go.
Right.
That's the answer we want then. Who you're backing? They can't let it go, can they?
No, I think once you've left office, I think you should really speak your mind.
Yeah,
anyway,
there you go. So he's going for Rob. So there you go. Interesting. OK, let's have a look at the King and Queen, should we? Because they've spent their first night in Australia ahead of the royal tour of Sydney and Canberra.
Their Majesties were welcomed to the country by the Australian Monarchist League, who plan to drum up even more support for them down under.
Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is live in Sydney for us this morning with a beautiful view of the Opera House behind him. It looks like you're stood in front of a cardboard cutout of that camera. It looks so fantastic.
You wait till the ferry goes past.
Yeah. So what's going on? What are we expecting from their Majesties today?
Well, I can assure you it's real, Stephen, because if I stood a couple of steps backwards, I would fall into the Sydney Harbour, which wouldn't be very good. But the King and Queen are on a rest day. Travelled for 24 hours, obviously, to get to Australia. And the King, mindful of his cancer diagnosis, his doctors thought it was a good idea for him to rest for a day before he starts in full force with his public engagements tomorrow, making sure he has enough energy to do so. But when he arrived in Sydney last night on the tarmac, he was greeted by a number of, well, the Governor-General of Australia, as well as a number of politicians, all of which apparently were Republicans, as in they do not want King Charles as head of state. But Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, has shelved plans earlier this year to hold a referendum on becoming a republic, and his government says it's not a priority to hold a referendum now either. And following that airport arrival, Anthony Albanese invited the King and Queen for a bit of an informal cup of tea, let's say, inside his official residence, a bit of a catch-up, bit of a natter ahead of the official engagements starting tomorrow. He also released a statement saying that Their Majesty for Australia, and this visit will be an opportunity to showcase the very best of our modern and dynamic nation. And I spent this morning, as in my morning, which was the middle of the night your time, with the Australian Monarchist League, and there's a lot of volunteers sorting out lots of T-shirts and flags, and they are going to be handing out these Australian flags to members of the public who have gathered at the various engagements for the King and Queen over the next 6 days or so to wave and welcome the monarch to his realm of Australia. And I spoke to Alexander Volz, who is the spokesperson for the Australian Monarchist League, and this is what he told me ahead of the visit.
As you can see here, the Australian Monarchist League is out in full force celebrating what is a momentous occasion. I think the tour is going to go really well. We're very optimistic, and at the end of the day, it's a reminder of the significance of our system and just how wonderful it is for this country.
Well, the King and Queen are thought to be staying at Admiral which is the official residence of the Governor-General. They were spotted earlier today wandering in the gardens of that official residence. Engagements start tomorrow, starting with a church service on Sunday morning in northern Sydney, and some protests are expected throughout the 6-day period, so it won't be completely smooth sailing for the King and Queen.
Yeah, this tour was going to include New Zealand, but I think because of the King's health, that's being cut out. So, yeah, you say just 5 days in Australia and then they come back?
Yes, exactly, Anne. So originally in the very early stages of planning for this tour, I understand New Zealand was part of the itinerary, but on doctor's advice, it was thought that would just be too much for the King. And there is a huge contrast, really, to the late Queen's first visit to Australia in 1954. She visited over 70 towns and cities across all of Australia, visiting every state. But King Charles is only spending 6 days in the country, visiting New South Wales and city of Canberra, but he's certainly making the most of it. A lot of engagements packed in, a cancer-related engagement later on this week as well. And then, of course, he's flying into the middle of the Pacific, the South Pacific, to Samoa, and I'll be travelling almost alongside him to cover the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, because he is head of the Commonwealth, another cause which King Charles really, really cares about.
I know we'll be talking to you about it next week when it happens, but I did notice on the list he's conducting a fleet review, which for members of the HMAS must be something quite phenomenal, actually, to have a fleet review with the King.
Yes, it really will be, Stephen. So the fleet review will be happening on Tuesday, I believe, just after the Sydney Opera House engagements, because the King and Queen are expected to meet members of the public outside Sydney Opera House on Tuesday. And then they will, we think, watch this fleet review in Sydney Harbour. And we may even get, if the weather passed, over the bridge. So a lot to look forward to, celebrating the fact that King Charles is here as the first ever king to step foot on Australian soil.
Lovely stuff. I think it'd be
That's
fantastic.
quite remarkable, isn't it, when you think?
Yeah, it is.
The only king.
Cameron, thank you very much indeed. It does look like he could be stood on the other side of the studio in front of a big screen.
It does, really. It looks too good to be true, doesn't it? It's just so amazing.
I still can't get my head around the fact our Cameron's all the way over there.
Absolutely. You know, there's a man in stirring up a lot of trouble, but only trouble in the media in Australia.
How is it?
Because he claims he is King Charles's love child.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he actually claims he is the love child of Charles and Camilla. But he was born when Charles and Camilla were 16 and 17, respectively, and hadn't even met each other. So how he's trying to prove it, but he's making a big fuss in the Australian media saying, I demand a DNA test.
Right.
And they're just trying to ignore him completely at the moment, except some of the media are finding it quite fascinating. But he's too old to actually be credible, even likelihood at all.
I sort of think with that sort of thing, why don't they just give him a DNA test? Why don't they just do it?
Just
do they not want royal DNA on file?
Well, probably not. But also, you know, I mean, it would just start a fire of people doing it as well, wouldn't they? But, yeah, I just don't quite understand how anyone's giving him much more the time of day, because he's just too old to possibly be.
Because people love a conspiracy
Yeah, they do, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Anyone wants to...
The idea being that apparently that they met when they were much younger than we know they met.
All right.
And that then Camilla got pregnant and went to Australia to have the baby.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's the idea. Because he knows he was adopted and he thinks his adoption is all part of that sort of cover-up.
Wow,
fascinating, eh?
Wouldn't that be a story?
Well, it would be, yeah. If it had a remote scintilla of truth about it, yes.
Right, let's see if we get any truth from Alex Deakin with your weather forecast.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day. And then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many, it will just be that. But for some, well, storm actually could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many, it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Time for the Great British Giveaway now. The clock is ticking, by the way. You need to get on with it because lines are closing on Friday.
Yeah, so make sure you don't miss out on your chance to win £36,000 completely tax-free for now. Here are all the details you need.
Good luck.
Oh, yes, best of luck to you on that one. We're going to talk about the US election coming up in just a moment. Not long to go. They've both been campaigning in Michigan, which is a swing state. Very important. So we'll find out who came out on top in just a moment.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, the first thing on in my mind when I heard about this is what has this country come to when we're talking about getting kids as young as 6 years old to be jabbed weekly or however often it is because they are too fat. Where are the parents in all of this? There's three things actually here that are important. Number one is we do not know the long-term consequences of these jabs. So if I had a child and I was going to let them have the jab, I would be feeling like I'm treating them like a lab rat, to be quite honest with you, because we don't know the long-term consequences. Secondly, the manufacturers are clear that some of the potential side effects can be very serious. We're talking about potentially pancreatitis, let's get my word out, and also it lists as a potential side effect thyroid cancer. Arguably, it's called the gamble jab, to be honest with you, because of these potential side effects at the moment. And then thirdly, I come back to the parents. Where are the parents in all of this? Because they are the role models. So it really is about parenting, and it's about parenting from being a role model yourself in terms of being slim and healthy and not expecting a jab to take your place and other people to take your place. If you have children, they are your responsibility. Think before you breed. The other thing you need to remember with this is when you stop taking that jab, it is highly likely that you're going to put all the weight back on. Now, the thought of a child of 6 years of age, starting with that jab, conditioning them mentally to live with that jab, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely not on.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's not only the leadership for the Tories that is going on at the moment, and how that one's going to finish, nobody really knows.
No.
I found it absolutely fascinating watching GB News the other night when they did the whole debate thing. It was amazing. I didn't think I'd be that interested, but I was. But I still can't make up my mind who's going to win it.
No, don't know.
Meanwhile, of course, the other big race for power is going on in the United States, and that gets weirder every day.
Oh, that's one way of looking at it. The candidates, of course, as you know, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both held rallies in the swing state of Michigan, where everything is to play for.
Yeah, because apparently back in 2016, Michigan helped propel Donald Trump to victory. Before then, Joe Biden took the state back in 2020. So neither Democrats nor Republicans are taking this state for granted.
Let's talk to Professor of US Politics, Scott Lucas, who joins us now. And it really does seem, Scott, when you look at the swing states, which are going to call all of this, that it really is too close to call at the moment.
Just to drive that home, there are 7 states that decide this U.S. election. You've got Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan in the north, in the south, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona. All 7 of those states are within 1.5% between the two candidates. All of them are effectively tied going into the last 15 days of the election.
So when we hear you say that, you might deduce that actually there's no point in either of the candidates campaigning anywhere else other than those states.
Well, I think that is where the focus has been, and most of the rallies will be in those 7 states. But I think what's important for the national election, but as you focus on those states, is to whip up that idea of turnout, to whip up that idea that it's not enough to say in a poll that you're going to vote for either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, that those people actually get out there on November the 5th, if they haven't voted already with early ballots. And it is going to be that question of turnout, especially amongst women and young voters, that I think will decide this election.
I'll tell you what I find a little bit worrying about all of this, and I hope it doesn't happen. But if it ends up being that close, that makes it more likely, doesn't it, that actually any peaceful transition of power is going to be problematic?
I mean, let's just be very frank. We need to be honest here. I think if Donald Trump narrowly wins, the Democrats will play by the rules of the game. We saw that in 2000 in the George W. Bush Al Gore contest. If Donald Trump loses narrowly, or even if it's not that narrow, he will say the election is illegitimate. He will say it's rigged. He will then launch a series of legal attempts to try to overturn the election as in 2020. The worry here is that he will call his supporters out onto the streets and that he will not check them if they turn violent. And let me just give you 2 statements to back that up in the past week. One is that Donald Trump is the person who said that he would call out the American military against Americans, his enemies within. But I think even more disturbing, what he said in the past 48 hours is that January the 6th, 2021, that attack on the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transition of power to Joe Biden was a day of love and peace.
I said in the introduction to you that the American campaign seemed to be getting weirder and weirder, because it seems to me that both candidates are saying, maybe politically unwise things. Certainly Donald Trump seems to have said so, as you've just outlined. And Kamala Harris has done some pretty extraordinarily dismal interviews. In your view, which one is making the greatest fool of themselves?
Well, I would urge people to look at the interviews with Kamala Harris, because I think what you've got is a contest between the sane and the weird, to be honest with you. I think if you look at her interview, for example, with Fox TV, and Fox, of course, is very pro-Trump, I think she laid out where she would go with the economy, with immigration, as well as issues like Trump's threat to democracy. Indeed, I think you would say that even though the Fox TV host tried to talk over her quite repeatedly, she made her points. Now, you may disagree with them. In contrast, you've got a Donald Trump who, in his latest interview with America's top businessmen and economists last weekend, told them, oh, none of you know what you're talking about, and then proposed a tariff on every country in the world, including the UK, including a 20,000% tariff on automobiles. So I think if you look in terms of Harris versus Trump, well, again, you can agree or disagree with what they say, but there is a contest of the sane versus the weird, which is going on.
OK. Professor Scott Lucas, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll keep you fully abreast of what's going on. We've got full coverage during the night, on the night that those results start to come in. It is just extraordinary, I think, frankly, how it all works.
Yeah, I mean, Scott there is saying that Kamala Harris at least laid out some policies. A lot of commentators are saying she actually said nothing. And And Trump's guilty of the same, not actually saying anything meaningful.
Which is interesting,
They're just
because when
throwing barbs at each other.
But when you talk to Republicans, what they actually say, sort of really sensible Republicans, is if Trump talked about policy, he would win, they say, because actually his policy platform appeals to more middle Americans, as they call it. But he isn't doing that.
But his speaking keeps going off-piste, doesn't he? He just gets carried away with saying something really quite extraordinary.
Which makes him come across as, which he is, as the older candidate, which, of course, is what he played against Joe Biden. But as you say, Kamala Harris doesn't seem to be saying a great deal either. Does that matter? I'll tell you what the comparison is for me, is that that's exactly what we've been saying about Kemi Badenoch, that she actually isn't coming out with a lot of policy, and yet she still seems to be the front runner.
She still seems to be impressive, yes.
So,
I don't know. It's but it's going to be close.
It is going to be
And it's
close.
almost impossible to say in what way. And there's going to be trouble.
I should think there will be. Right, don't go anywhere. We've got the sport heading your way with Mark. That's in just a moment.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm going to see your show, Behind the Shoulder Pads, one night only at the Adelphi Theatre, October the 22nd. You're talking about your extraordinary life. Stage, screen, published author, 19 books, TV, most important.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who's managed to straddle, 7-8 decades in showbiz and still be at the top?
Yes. I was thinking about that the other day because somebody said, with the last of good. There is a Shirley MacLaine.
Sure.
She started at the same time as me.
Right.
Sophia Loren.
Yeah.
She started around the same time.
She's not working much, though.
It's true, she's not, but she's still out there being, a major icon. And, of course, people like Dick Van Dyke, who's just almost 100.
Yeah, he's incredible, isn't he?
I'm a mere babe next to him.
Yeah, you are. But and I was thinking about, you've written some extraordinary, wicked, waspish diaries, which, of course, you can because you've worked with so many people. Look at the names. Frank Sinatra, Lana Turner, Elizabeth Taylor. Dean Martin. Gregory Peck.
Richard Burton.
Paul Newman. The list goes on and on. And
my favourite.
Was he your favourite?
Yes.
Why?
Because I saw him in a movie when I was a little girl called For Me and My Gal with Judy Garland, and I just fell in love with him. It's such a cute movie. Well, they don't make movies like that anymore. And then I was lucky enough when I first went to Hollywood at age 20 to meet him and literally hang out with him and his friends. And then I put him in a movie with me that I produced. He played my husband in a movie called Sins. And he was wonderful. He was really wonderful.
The People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's talk sport. Mark Foster is here. Morning. Should we have a bit of Thomas Tuchel? Because it's still... I can't get my head round the fact that he's been announced as England manager out of the blue when up until 3 days before, everyone else was saying, well, Lee Carsley seems to be like a shoo-in.
Yeah.
And then it's all just gone, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's really odd.
Well, there was obviously a lot of discussions going on in the background, whether it's been a name that's been in the background or whether they've made a decision on him ages ago. I mean, that's the thing we don't know. But yeah, I mean, listen, I think the thing is the proof is in the pudding. It depends on the results we get. I think it's a good move in terms of people don't like it because I don't think they like a foreign manager, first of all, let alone a German foreign manager. But we've had a couple in the past.
Yes.
You said Capello, Sven-Goran Eriksson. He's managed in the Premier League. He's managed Chelsea to win in the Champions League. Bayern Munich have won the German League. PSG have won the French League. So he's got a record of winning things.
Do we know when he's actually taking over?
I presume from the next game.
No, it's not. It's January, I think.
Is it?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's January.
Because really, frankly, we will continue this little debate on whether he's good news or bad news until his first game.
Until his first game, or until he's exactly his run of performances. It'd be interesting to see how he sets the team out, because I've always thought, and this is the thing I thought with Gareth Southgate, so I watched a bit of football, is that the England team played in a Gareth Southgate way. Yet all the players historically played for Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, all the top teams, and played in a 4-3-3 format and a very attacking football style. But we played differently when they played for England, which I thought was a bit strange.
That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
But
then Lee Carsley changed it up, didn't he? And
I think he went a bit more to the Pep Guardiola sort of side of things, but.
But then we still did very well under Southgate, didn't we?
Oh, we did.
We didn't go all the way, but we did extremely well,
Finals,
so something worked.
Semi-finals, it was the best we've been for a long time. He had 102 games in charge, I think, so he did a good job. I was going to talk a little bit about Adam Peaty.
Oh, were you? Oh, go on.
Well, Adam Peaty got brought in by Tom Bates. Now, Tom Bates is the mental skills coach, and he does some work with British swimming. He also works with the British...
Mental attitude towards sport, I suppose, and the dedication plays a big part in swimming.
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think in life in general, I think whatever you do, it's the way it's to do with your attitude and your behaviour towards stuff, the way we approach things, the way we get over things, the way that we process everything. So I think he's obviously taken his swimming mindset into a rugby mindset. I think anybody... When you look at people that are good at things, why are they good at things? Because they are obsessive and they focus and they work hard. And along the way, it's never plain sailing, is it? There's lots of ups and downs, and
I think it's really interesting for a sport aspect, because who springs to mind, of course, is Akabusi.
Yeah.
Who obviously, he does these sort of inspirational speaking and things for a living now. And there's a man walks into the room and you immediately feel better.
Yes, actually, that's very true.
Which is, I mean, it's an incredible skill. But obviously, he's had a lot of troubles in his early life, and he's had to really focus himself. And so actually, there's that mental attitude.
I go in and do a lot of corporate speaking with businesses and schools, a bit like Chris.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, there's transferable skills. And I think the thing is, it's the way you approach everything. I think what sport does, what teaches you very, very quickly is you work towards something, you either get it right or wrong, and it's OK. Because sport moves on, or life moves on.
How do you coach somebody to get past a real disappointment?
Creating good habits. So I think the thing is, if you get a bad result, and I think of the word fail, from action I learn. By doing something, you get a result. It might not be the result you want, but you learn something and you go again. You either change things or you do the same thing again, and hopefully get until you get it right. So I think what sport does, it teaches, it's not life or death. You get a result. What did I do to get here? How can we change things? How can we do things better? And then rephrasing things and repackaging things and looking at it in a different way.
Good life lessons.
I like that. Fail from action I learn. It's obviously a well-known phrase. I don't know that. I've never heard it before.
I didn't know it until I heard it.
Oh, right. That's brilliant. No, well, it's something that we've learned today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what, you need to work on your laugh.
Why is that?
Obviously, if you're talking around like Akabusi does, you need to work on the laugh.
You could have a big laugh.
That's true. When I play golf, it's known as the woodpecker.
Right, thank you. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on. We've got the papers heading our way. Don't go anywhere.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Some controversial film news. Someone has hired an actor who's white. What the hell is going on?
Let me just fix my hair. Let me just come away. So, Wuthering Heights film stirs controversy after white actor, he's white, chosen to play Heathcliff.
Is that your Humza Yusuf impersonator?
That is, that's my Chinese accent. Experts have gone, oh no, there's a lot of, in recent years, he's definitely black or mixed race because he was found in Liverpool. And as you know, everybody in Liverpool is black or mixed race.
I mean, have you read the novel?
God, no.
Right, well, I have. And the novel itself does say, quite explicitly, that he is dark-skinned.
Yeah.
That the implication is that he's of Romani origin. So he wouldn't be whiter than white, you know. So, I mean...
No, that's fine. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that casting... But on the other hand...
This guy's Spanish. His origin's Spanish.
Do you remember when there was a black Anne Boleyn for a Channel 5 miniseries? That seems to be more egregious, because, I tell you what, Anne Boleyn definitely wasn't black.
You racist. No, I almost feel sorry in this story because you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't now. Because if they'd have, like, it's not like he's a bit of an anti-hero, right? It's not like a good all-round.
He's not a good guy.
So if you go, right, we definitely need to cast someone black for this. What? Why are you picking just black people to play someone with so many character flaws? Or you go, why?
Like they did with Darth Vader.
Yes, that's right.
He was played by the Green Cross Code Man. Okay. Just the voice was done by...
That's true. Yeah. Yes, it was the Green Cross Code Man. I wonder what they were saying there.
Have you ever seen the videos of the original audio Star Wars?
No.
So you've got... I can't remember his name, but you've got the Green Cross Code Man going like, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Yeah. No, Luke, I am your father.
They should have left it as it was.
This is the difference between me. We're talking about Star Wars. You're like, oh, have you read Bronte, Wuthering, whatever?
She only wrote one novel, Josh. You could... do with the courtesy of reading it.
I'll read it straight after I finish your one.
And it's actually brilliant.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Time for the papers at 8:45 with the Deputy Editor of Spiked Online, Fraser Myers, and Showbiz journalist extraordinaire, Stephanie Tetchy. Good morning. You know I love you.
Love you too, Boo.
Now, Fraser, we've just been talking about the American elections, and there's a story in the front page of the Financial Times talking about how somebody or a small group of somebodies are trying to influence the Trump vote.
Yeah, so the odds of Trump winning have gone up dramatically. But this might be down to the fact that a few people with deep pockets have been putting big bets on Donald Trump. Now, presumably, they think they're going to win those bets. But it's interesting how it's swayed the odds much faster than the polls have been moving.
So it's giving the impression that he is the winning candidate.
That he's got more momentum. Now, it should be said that he is eating away at Kamala Harris's poll lead, the national poll lead. And in the FT, they're saying that Trump is winning in 5 of the 7 key swing states. And if people remember, it's based on the Electoral College rather than the popular vote.
I mean, that's the problem. The national vote
actually doesn't matter. Yeah. Trump in 2016 lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton, but he won in the states where it counts. And it feels like there's a strong likelihood he could repeat the trick again.
How much money are these people putting in?
I think, you know, we're talking...
big money?
We're talking big bucks to influence the entire betting market. We must be talking, you know, tens of thousands, I would have thought, at any one point.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, they reckon it could be one person or a very small group of people.
Or a small group of people.
Who are doing
because,
it deliberately.
they're saying that they're looking at the conversations these people are having and they're using similar language, basically, is how they're... Yeah.
Well, if you've got rich friends, you can influence anything.
Steph, can we have a look at what's the Eye saying about this awful news this week with Liam Payne? Because I know Sharon Osbourne's come out, hasn't she, and said some stuff about how people aren't being protected.
Well, that's the big conversation that has been taking place since Liam Payne's death. There is always this big topic of the duty of care for young stars who experience fame at such a young age and how they are being guided after appearing on shows like X Factor.
Because remind us how One Direction got started.
Yeah, One Direction, they were only 16-year-olds, all 5 of them, And it was like they found success on X Factor, and, you know, it was quite immediate how they just rocketed to fame, and the pressure that was on them to, you know, to perform and deal with the limelight. But that only lasted 5 years. And in the 7 years since that, they've been split up. You know, they've been kind of left to their own devices. You've had people like Harry Styles, who's, you know, been OK with his solo success. But unfortunately for Liam, he faced many addictions, many battles, and obviously how tragic his death has been. It's just now people are saying, are these young stars being looked after? And
it's almost like not that... If you've got when you've got the success, you are sort of looked after.
You are.
Like, I mean, Harry will still be getting looked after, but it's when you drop away from that then people just don't care.
But then I have to ask, what are we supposed to do when a man is in his 30s and he's got all this wealth? Are we still supposed to keep on checking in on them and seeing that, holding their hand through life?
Well, sometimes they will not let you hold their hand anyway.
Yeah.
Because isn't it a fact that his record company dropped him just days before?
Yeah.
His something else happened.
He checked into the Priory, I think, and left after 2 days.
Yes,
That's what the Sun was reporting.
So, I mean, it may well be that people in the end left him to it because he would not be helped.
And they can't force, you know, their
I'm
help.
not saying that's the case, but I suggest that it could have been.
It could have been the case, and I just think now there has to be a kind of happy medium. But I think as well, with this generation of youngsters, hopefully their eyes are now open and realising fame is not all that it's cracked out to be.
Do you think young people will ever realise that?
You know, when you see deaths like this, and I think they will start to think that actually they need to be more careful. But I don't think young people will regret becoming famous.
No.
It's what they want to be. It's what they
want
dream for.
So they might regret it. Who was it that said fame is like a massive mountain? You climb this massive mountain. When you get to the top, you realise there's nothing there.
Bruce Springsteen has even said something today about how the fact that fame is... you don't have any idea what fame is like, and if it happens to you too young, you cannot cope.
I think what needs to be got rid of is that notion of 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be this, you can be successful, and once you have finished being famous for what you've been famous for, there is still life there for you, and it can be healthy and it can be positive.
I do wonder whether there's sort of conversation around, you know, duty of care of television shows might be a bit out of date, because how are people getting famous now? They're getting famous online, you know, through their own devices. You know, there isn't going to be someone, you know, you might be looked after on a show like The X Factor with a big budget if you join at 16, but if you become viral, famous on TikTok, who's going to look after you? You really are on your own.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Can we have a look at the Mail, Fraser? Because this is very odd that Labour is sending some current and former staff members to campaign for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, this is extraordinary. So a job advert was put, or a little post was put on LinkedIn by someone from the Labour Party saying, you know, we're all going out there, come join us. Now, it is a volunteering thing, I should say, but it is still a little bit strange how people in British politics do these little pilgrimages to America. I mean, you saw at the Democratic National Convention, that was swarming with actual, you know, sitting Labour MPs only a few months after they'd been elected here in the UK. People were really, it's funny, people were really critical of Nigel Farage for attending, you know, Trump's convention, and said nothing about, like, scores and scores of Labour MPs. I wonder if we just, you know, we need to remember that British
But he wasn't
politics...
an MP at the time that he did that, was he?
I think he had just been elected.
Just been elected. But that was just after he'd been shot, wasn't it? So it was
exactly. And he's a friend.
Yeah.
But I think, Liz Truss went out, didn't she? Just after she lost her election, she went out to the States.
And I think she spoke to relatively empty room, it seems like, unfortunately.
You don't see American politicians coming over to the UK trying to help us with our politics.
No, you don't really. Well, I mean, Obama tried it once, and it didn't go down very well.
No, that's right. He was outspoken, wasn't he?
Yeah. It just feels like, you know, I feel like they're acting like we're colonised by America or something.
Yeah.
You know,
well, maybe Labour, within the Labour ranks, they just feel they did so well.
Yeah.
They need to go and spread the action.
Well,
but are they telling America they did well? Actually, because you could argue the Tories lost.
Yeah.
It's not that Labour won, but anyway, whatever.
The Harris campaign have been asking Labour for tips, and what can you tell them? Have a rubbish incumbent. But the Democrats are the incumbent there, unfortunately, and that's why this might not go their way.
Yeah. Can we talk food, Steph?
Yeah.
Fish and chips. Fish and chops.
Fish and chips might be a hit with the French at last. There's been a new British food cookbook which has been published in France, and a lot of the critics are saying actually French people are starting to love British food, because usually they've slated French English food as quite stodgy, but now they're looking for interesting ways to cook up fish and chips and put leek and potato soup. So yeah, they're trying to get in with the Brits.
Would have thought they'd find that all bland.
Isn't leek and potato soup vichyssoise?
I beg your pardon, what?
Well, isn't it?
Vichyssoise?
Yeah.
What's vichyssoise?
Leek and potato soup in French, I think.
But also, like, traditional British food.
I mean, in other words, I don't think that's anything non-French.
No, and traditional British food is not bland. I think this is actually a bit of a myth. We think of it because of rationing. That's why we think British food is bland. Before rationing, why do you think we took all the spices from everywhere across the world?
Vichyssoise soup is a thick soup made with leeks, onions and potatoes.
And herbs, so it's got herbs in it.
Well, it's
That's the thing.
That's what I mean. But also, if you go to French seaside resorts, they do fish and chips. I mean, their chips are French. You know, they're much more French fries, pommes frites. But you can go to a seaside town and you can go to a seaside snack stall and get fish and chips.
Yeah, you're missing the point, though, Anne, because they don't have mushy peas and gravy.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they'd even look at mushy peas or gravy.
That's where they're going wrong.
That's where they need to learn.
And I'm sure that their chips are cooked with garlic oil, garlic olive oil. Oh, how nice would that be?
That sounds nice.
Yeah, exactly.
That does sound nice.
So I think this idea that the French are suddenly just
liking British
fish and
food.
chips.
No.
I think there's something up with me, though, because, I mean, I like leek and potato soup.
Oh, yeah.
But the idea of someone saying, would you like some vichyssoise? I'd be like, get on your bite.
Yeah, but you'd have the same thing. If you went
It
to a
would be the
posh
same thing.
restaurant, that's what it would be called.
Vichyssoise. Oh, dear me. Anyway, on that note, it's quite got my stomach rumbling, actually.
Me too.
Steph, Fraser, it's been a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Time for the weather.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, Storm Ashley could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain, only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it, it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is... I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week, Free Speech Brighton, a sister group of the Free Speech Union, claimed that they were kicked out of a pub in the city for discussing trans issues in schools. The group booked a room in a pub for an evening of speeches and discussion when they claimed security guards came and asked them to leave after one speaker began to talk about this topic. Now, a clip of the evening was, in fact, posted to social media. Can you give us some background to what happened, what the event was for, and why you booked it?
Our normal pub was being refurbished, so about 3 weeks ago I went in and booked a local pub for a meeting, and they didn't ask any questions about what sort of meeting. It was in a back room. It was mainly secluded from the rest of the pub, so I thought it would be fine. But anyway, they didn't ask any questions. They took my booking. We arrived, I set up. The first speaker started speaking, who's a retired teacher who is concerned about trans in schools and how that affects children. But she was talking purely about children. She was not talking about adults who have protected characteristics, obviously. And then towards the end of her speech, I became aware of security guards standing behind me in the middle room. So I went to have a quick word with them and see what they wanted. And they said, we've had a complaint. And I said, what's the complaint? And they wouldn't say. Then they said, will you come and talk to the landlord? So I went to the front of the bar and they indicated this chap was the landlord, but he looked about 20, so I don't think he was the landlord. So I said, I hear you have a complaint about us. Can you tell me what it is? And he couldn't.
That sounds very Kafkaesque, as though you've committed a crime, but they can't tell you what the crime
is. That's what I couldn't understand, because, you might... Obviously, they can't tell you who the complainant is, but they should be able to tell you what the complaint is.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning. Today, Labour's war on working Brits.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to extend a freeze on income tax thresholds, which could see millions of people apparently dragged into higher tax brackets.
Well, this comes as the Chancellor is looking to bring in apparently an extra $7 billion in revenue, but the move has raised questions about Labour's honesty on tax rises during the election.
Meanwhile, they promised the NHS billions in what is being called the biggest reform since 1948, as the health service chief admits productivity and public confidence have indeed plummeted.
The King and Queen are on that 6-day tour of Australia, greeted by the country's Prime Minister and a torrential rainstorm. But our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is live in Sydney.
Yes, the Queen joking. She brought the British weather with her from the United Kingdom. Republicans on the tarmac to greet them, Republican politicians. But what are monarchists doing to prepare for the royal visit? Find out shortly.
And as the US presidential election draws even closer, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris both hold rallies in the swing state of Michigan. But who came out on top?
And British values, should they be taught in schools? Well, believe it or not, former Home Secretary David Blunkett seems to think so. He says if we don't, we might regret it.
For many of us, a fine day today, but brewing out in the Atlantic, we have Storm Ashley. That's going to bring a wet and windy spell for all tomorrow, and for some, the winds could cause some problems. Join me later for a full forecast.
It's just gone 9 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
And I'm Anne Diamond, and this is GB News Breakfast.
I know lots of you are listening on the radio this morning.
Yes.
There are lots of people listening on the radio. It's a good way to get the show, actually, if you're out and about. The nice thing is, talking about Australia, and obviously we're talking to Cameron Walker this morning, who's covering the royal visit, is because the Sydney Opera House is so iconic, even if you're driving along in the car or what have you, you can picture exactly where he is, because it's such an iconic image. Isn't it? Such an extraordinary building.
It is extraordinary. Absolutely amazing. When you fly into... Have you been to Australia?
No.
When you fly into Sydney, you fly over. It's just the sort of way the aeroplane comes in, turns around and then approaches the airport. You usually fly over the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. And so you get a chance, and the pilot, or the captain always says, have a look out, you can see it. And you can't believe it, because until you've seen it for yourself, you've only ever seen it in a school atlas or something, you know, in a geography book. And you suddenly see it, and it is unmistakable. And you think, I can't believe it's real. It's just so exciting.
I'll tell you what, if I was going down there, I'm not very good at being a tourist. I don't like to... You sort of think, oh, I don't want to be the stereotypical tourist.
You have
or whatever.
to.
But if I was in Sydney, I would be walking up the Harbour Bridge and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'd be doing all of that.
And you have to go up the steps of the Opera House and have your picture taken with the Opera House behind you.
You just have to be
I mean, the shot behind Cameron there with the sunset, I presume.
Oh,
yes,
it will
sunset on the beautiful arcs of the Opera House, the sails they call them of the Opera House.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, because it's meant to be a ship at sail.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I never knew that. Every day is a school day.
Yeah, designed by a Dutchman, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Just beautiful, beautiful, against that lovely blue sea. Wonderful place. We were talking about whether the French would ever fall for our fish and chips. And I was trying to make the point that they already eat fish and chips in France.
Yeah, but not out of newspaper.
Well, if you go to a seaside town, you can get it in little cones. Oh yeah.
Can you?
And they usually serve it in little bits that are bite-sized.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and the frites with them. Diane has been in touch. Hi, Diane. She says, our French granddaughters love fish and chips. So did our daughters' friends when we served them at home whilst we lived in France. It's not true that the French don't like our food. It just needs to be cooked and presented properly when they're first introduced to it.
Well...
I can imagine the French not really liking it when we used to serve it in newspaper. I mean, that's not very French, is it?
That's part of the fun, isn't it? Gravy. You see, gravy, I'm all for gravy. I like to have gravy on everything.
The French have gravy, don't they?
Yeah, but they call it jus. Jus. Onion. Do you want some onion
Would you like some jus?
with that? No, but I'll have some gravy. Thanks very much indeed.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right.
Common me, but I don't care.
No.
Right. Millions of taxpayers, that's you and me, by the way, could find ourselves paying a higher rate of tax after the budget.
That's as the Chancellor prepares to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds, which Labour previously, apparently only about a year ago, criticised themselves as being a stealth tax.
Well, this comes as the NHS is expected to get billions in the budget, but it has accepted it must make fundamental reforms to the service.
Health bosses, however, have refused to promise that the cash will be enough to meet Labour's manifesto pledge of reducing waiting lists.
Let's head to Torquay. Former Minister for Immigration, Kevin Foster, is there for us. Good to see you this morning, Kevin. I've got to say, when it comes to tax thresholds, is this a bit of a red herring? In the sense that, yes, it will have an impact, but actually not for another 5 or 6 years, because that freeze that is there now was put in place by the Conservative government.
Well, that's certainly the argument the Chancellor will try to make. I suspect she'll particularly try and make it in 2028 to 2029 for some reason of what might happen in that particular year and time frame. But I think where the difference was perhaps during the general election was the fact that the Conservative Party had said it would exempt pensioners, effectively making sure that the allowance was always above the state pension level for those of that age. I think the big one will be is if the Chancellor decides not to do something like that. And then, of course, the state pension itself, not just a pension you've got on top of the state pension, but the state pension itself will almost certainly become liable for some income tax over the coming years.
I mean, when you sit back and look at the way Labour has conducted themselves over the first 100 days of government, do you sort of sit back and think, well, they're facing all of the same problems that we were facing and, frankly, not coming up with anything new?
Well, of course, the challenges were there and were known before July, and everything from small boats. Labour said it would scrap Rwanda and smash the gangs. Well, smash the gangs is a great slogan. It's not actually a great strategy. We see, for example, on the economy in other areas, it was actually the economy was doing better than some of our comparators in Europe, but still there were challenges there. And I think it's one of the things the Conservative Party is going to have to avoid over the next 4 or 5 years. It's very easy to say a lot of stuff from the comfort of opposition, and then suddenly find when the cold, hard reality of being a government hits and you actually have to deliver or tackle certain problems, it can be very different. Things like storm outlets on the coast, that was a very easy thing to say they shouldn't exist in opposition. You've now got to actually try and deal with that. And where do you find the billions of pounds to do so if you're a government saying that?
Talking of billions of pounds, explain this to me. I'm not getting this. The NHS is wide-scale reform, Biggest reform since 1948, we're told. We also apparently have the health service chief admitting that productivity and public confidence has plummeted. Productivity is the key one there for me. And yet they're getting billions of pounds to sort it out. Well, if productivity's down, why can't something be done without it costing us more money?
Well, it's a very good point. And one of the things that I think, again, in some of the reflections the Conservative Party will need to have post the general election is how things like productivity in the health service, not so much during the pandemic period, we can all accept the NHS faced a challenge that hadn't happened for 100 years. But now, since the pandemic, we're now 2 years beyond that period. Things like productivity are lower than they were before. And actually, that would be, if you got productivity in the NHS back to where it was a few years back, that'd be equivalent of putting an extra couple of £1 billion into it. It'll also be interesting, what is fundamental reform? What does that actually mean? It's easy to say it. What does that mean? I think one of the early, perhaps, challenges for the next leader of the Conservative Party is going to be if Wes Streeting comes forward with something quite radical, that it would be very tempting to play a bit of short-term politics with and oppose, make all sorts of comments. Let's say it's something about bringing the private sector in or structuring how we all go through GPs at the moment if it was going direct to certain providers. How does the Conservative Party respond? Does it have perhaps the courage of conviction to actually vote with something that a Labour government might be doing that's not universally popular, but which you could see would have a long-term benefit? Or do you play short-term politics with potentially people looking at the Conservative Party saying, well, yeah, OK, this is interesting, but, I'm not sure this is something you'd actually be opposing if you happen to be in government?
Well, the sad fact is, I suppose, for you and your colleagues, is that you've got 5 years of this before you can even hope to fight it. Either of those Tory leadership contestants that we saw the other night, do you think either of them were speaking from the point of view that they're going to have to be a solid and worthy opposition? It's not just enough to lay out your policies for 5 years' time. You need to have a strategy as to how to be an effective opposition.
Yes, I think, absolutely, because, the way you get yourself heard by the public to get a chance to convince them to allow you to form government, particularly given what happened in July, that's not going to be as easy as it might be. They are going to have a strategy for being for how you... Opposing isn't just about attacking everything, because if you do that, people just look at the Conservative Party and say, oh, come on, some of these things you'd have done yourself. What we will need to have is what are the things where there is a genuine difference. So, for example, on Rwanda plan, immigration, which Rob Jenrick set out, on some of the issues around gender identity and some of those issues. You can see Kemi Badenoch's setting out her thoughts on those. And there'll need to be that balance between being an opposition but also being credible. Because if you're not credible, then you might as well forget putting forward a manifesto at a general election, because there's things like Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband found that, great opposing everything and attacking, but when it actually came down to it, people just took one look at them and said, we just don't think you're credible. And by the way, the same happened to the Conservative Party back in 2001. We spent 4 years attacking the then Labour government. And when we got to a general election, people said, well, thanks for the attacks, but we don't think you're an alternative.
OK, Kevin, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. And for more politics, you can catch up on the Tory leadership candidates, Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, going head-to-head, as they did on Thursday night. If you go to gbnews.com, you can watch the full show or scan the QR code that you can see on your screen.
Now, the King and Queen have spent their first night in Australia ahead of their royal tour of Sydney and Canberra.
The Majesty is welcomed to the country by the Australian Monarchist League. Now, they're drumming up support for them in that great land down under.
And our royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us live from Sydney. How's it going for them there in Australia, Cameron?
Well, it was a bit of a soggy start, to be honest, Anne. When the Queen came down from the Australian Air Force jets last night at Sydney Harbour, she jokes to somebody greeting her that she'd brought the British weather with her, but they were soon inside with the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for an informal cup of tea, as it was described to me. A bit of an informal welcome. Anthony Albanese releasing a statement, the Australian Prime Minister, saying Their Majesties have a deep regard for Australia, and this visit will be an opportunity to showcase the very best of our modern and dynamic nation. It was slightly ironic, actually, for the airport arrival because every politician on that tarmac is actually a Republican. However, there is absolutely no plans from the Australian government at this time to hold a referendum on becoming a republic. In fact, they shelved plans to hold a referendum back in January, so there is no immediate threat that King Charles is going to be removed as head of state. And I spent my morning, your middle of the night, with the Australian Monarchist League. They're an organisational group of volunteers who will be handing out flags, Australian flags, at the various engagements King Charles and Queen Camilla have planned for the next 6 days or so, trying to drum up support for the monarchy, getting Australian people or encouraging them to welcome their Majesties to both Sydney and Canberra. And I spoke to the spokesperson for that Monarchist League, Alexander Volz, and here's what he said about the royal visit.
You can see here the Australian Monarchist League is out in full force celebrating what is a momentous occasion. I think the tour is going to go really well. We're very optimistic, and at the end of the day, it's a reminder of the significance of our system and just how wonderful it is for this country.
Would say the King and Queen have been resting after their 24-hour trip from the United Kingdom down under. They are believed to be staying at Admiralty House. That's the official residence of the Governor-General here in Australia. Tomorrow, their first big engagement with members of the public will be at a church service in northern Sydney.
It will be fascinating to see just what sort of turnout they get, Cameron, won't it, from members of the Australian public, whether they're sort of massive royal supporters or just people who want to have a peek.
Yeah, it certainly will be, Stephen. I think from spending the last 24 hours or so in Sydney, 36 now, there is a lot of interest in the royal family, whether they love them or loathe them. So I do expect there, unless there's a completely torrential rain, there to be relatively big crowds for the King and Queen, because even if perhaps they're not 100% supportive of the monarchy, they're still two incredibly famous people, world famous people, the King and Queen. And if they're in the neighbourhood, then I think a lot of people would be encouraged to go and see them. Whether or not they're going to be patriotically waving flags we'll have to wait and see. But I suspect there will be a number of people out and about. But there will also be a huge security presence here in Sydney. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how well they're received.
And how well are they looking, particularly, obviously, the King with his health concerns? At the moment, does he look as though he's enjoying it and fit for the job?
Yeah, I mean, we've only seen him briefly for the walk off the plane at the airport and an official photograph in Anthony Albanese's office yesterday. He looks like he was in good spirits, despite the fact he'd just flown 24 hours across the world to Australia. As you said, he's been diagnosed with cancer. He's paused his cancer treatment while he is in Australia for this tour. Doctors have allowed him to do that. He was spotted, a paparazzi photograph of him was spotted this morning in the gardens of Admiralty House with the Queen taking a stroll. So he appears to be okay so far, but this is just day 1 of 6 in Australia, and then he's spending a few days in Samoa as well for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So I think it's too early to tell how he's going to take it, but clearly doctors feel he is well enough to do so.
Lovely, Cameron, thank you. If you're listening on the radio, there's a ship behind you, Cameron. I don't know what sort of vessel that is, but that's a stunner right behind you.
It's a big cruise ship, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a massive cruise ship. There's many cruise ships. It's a Disney cruise ship because it was. You can see the Mickey Mouses on the funnels there.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
But it's absolutely ginormous. It's dwarfing the Sydney Opera House. But there's been so many cruise ships coming in and out of this harbour over the last few days, Stephen and Anne. And actually, they had to delay the start of the light show yesterday at Sydney Opera House, where they projected images of previous visits of the King and Queen onto the Sydney Opera House, because the cruise ship was going to be in the way when it was departing port of the Opera House for all the cameras, so it was delayed by about half an hour.
Oh, I tell you what, it's all going on where you are, Cameron. Thank you very much indeed.
You wouldn't need a telly.
It absolutely is.
You wouldn't need a telly if you had a flat overlooking Sydney Harbour.
Oh, no, you wouldn't.
You'd just sit by the window all day and look, couldn't you? Oh, love it, love it.
One of the ladies who messaged me yesterday, so you really must go to Australia, it's fabulous and well worth a long journey, that said, and this was the view from our hotel room, and it was looking out over the harbour and the Opera House and everything else. Yeah. And you just think, wow.
Wow. Wow is the only word, isn't it? Shall we bring us back up to date, though, with good old Blighty, find out what the weather is like, how much rain we're going to get today. Here's Alex Deakin.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, storm actually could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers across the northwest of Scotland. Breezy here, but for most places the wind's lighter than yesterday, and as it brightens up we see some sunshine. Temperatures a touch above average, so feeling pretty pleasant in that sunshine. It might just take most of the day before the sun finally pops out across East Anglia and Kent. But for many it'll be a fine and dry evening. I did mention a few showers just coming into western parts of Scotland. Pretty well scattered, so somewhat hit and miss. Much of eastern Scotland dry, along with central and southern Scotland. A fine evening here. Same goes for Northern Ireland. Clear at first, but we will see the cloud increasing later on. And for most of England and Wales, much of this evening dry with lengthy clear spells. But eyes out west, because developing during the course of today a storm system. This is Storm Ashley, named by Met Éireann, the Irish Weather Service, but it is likely to bring some problems to parts of the UK. As we go through the night, it'll start to introduce wet and windy weather to Northern Ireland, the rain spreading into Wales and the southwest as well. It will introduce milder conditions. Ahead of it will turn a little chilly. And then for tomorrow, spell of wet weather swinging through, but it's the winds giving us the greatest cause for concern. A Met Office yellow warning covering Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of northwest England and North Wales, and an amber warning for the far northwest, where gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour could cause some disruption. Potential for structural damage, even branches and trees down. Further south, just a wet and windy day. But across the north in particular, Storm Ashley could cause some problems tomorrow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Now, time for the Great British Giveaway, but you gotta get a wriggle on because the clock is ticking. Lines close on Friday.
So make sure you don't miss out, because it could be your chance to win 36 grand in tax-free cash. Here's how.
This is and good luck.
Yeah, best of luck to you. Now, can you imagine being a kind-hearted Brit who rescues animals and then gets arrested for it? Sounds like a bad joke, but it actually happened, and we're going to talk to the man involved in just a moment.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
There's a huge financial and mental strain for parents, but we have this system now where it talks about they bringing a family member to help, but I don't think that's happening a lot of the time. I think people are having to be off work, look after their child, and often, sorry to say, but their school always calls the mum, and then you have this situation where you have nobody to look after your child. People's grandparents don't seem to want to do it so much, and often family members aren't just down the road. So what we have is no village. And I think it's really important when you have a child that you need that village.
Are children getting more sicker than they used to be, or is it just that we take the odd sniffle a bit more seriously now since 2020?
Yes, I do think the odd sniffle can be. I know in my school they say 3 days away, you know, the slightest little thing, and it's like...
If you have a cold?
Yeah, no, please, go in, yeah. And
3 days off if you have a cold for a child, and we wonder why all these parents aren't at work. I think some of these figures about people who could be working and aren't working, they're not necessarily on benefits, but some of them will be people who, during the pandemic, particularly parents, decided to get a different work-life balance. They quite liked being at home, and they realised the children are benefiting from it. Do you think those people are in these statistics, Annette?
Of people staying at home with not working?
Who decided to not go back to work of working age?
Yes, I think a lot of people don't want to go into an office anymore either. They've had that little bit of freedom and they're like, I'm not going in. And I know employers are trying to get them to go in, but they just want to be at home. They want to be near their children if their children are sick, whether that's the mum or the dad. And also, a lot of people don't live near their office or wherever. They don't want to commute. Train fares have gone up, so they say, well, why should I pay? So you have this whole knock-on effect throughout the economy.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 9:25. I'm a very proud Northerner.
Yes,
as you know. I mean, I don't go on about it.
No, oh, not at all.
But anyway, it's very rare that being from Barrow-in-Furness that you get to talk about someone who's in Barrow-in-Furness.
Oh, so our next guest is.
So I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, he has a remarkable story to tell. He's an animal rescuer, and he's actually now been awarded £10,000 in damages after being wrongly arrested for stealing a chicken.
You can't make it up, can you? Edward White took in a lost chicken and posted a picture online to help trace the owner. Despite that, officers turned up at his door and arrested him.
And although the allegations fell apart, obviously, the police refused to apologise for the wrongful arrest, leading to Edward receiving the payout.
It just sounds like a bad joke. Edward White joins us now. Edward, it's good to see you this morning. What on earth went on here?
If I'm honest, I don't really know myself. As I say, I was arrested. They had 4 officers, 2 police vans, come for property, took me in the school, wouldn't tell me what I was going to the station for, put me in the police van, took me to the station. At that point, I was told what was there for. I'll be honest, I thought it was going to be a Beetle sketch. And I was treated as such. You know, I was taking the mick and having a laugh with the officers and stuff. When I realised that, you know, that they actually were there, it was a legitimate thing. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. You know, I'm an animal rescue. They've even brought us things. But the officer in question wasn't interested in anything really. He was just out to make out that I'd made this theft, which obviously I did. I supplied them with the details of the person that handed it in to us, and it took them 2 weeks to do it. I then went back to him and said, right, I'd like to meet with the chief constable, and I'd like a meeting, and I'd like an apology. To be informed, no, we're corporate police, we don't do either of them. So I took advice, long story short, issued legal proceedings, and we ended up getting the payout that we got paid out.
Yeah.
But today we still haven't had a meeting, and today we still haven't had an apology.
Oh, and maybe you won't ever get the apology. But, I mean, you're very good-humoured about it, but it must have been a heck of a shock. And actually, as somebody who likes to rescue animals in need, I mean, it was a bit of an insult as well.
To be fair, you're right. You know, I'm looking back at it now, and to me, it is a little bit silly. At the time, again, until I realised that they were deadly serious, it was a little bit silly. I thought it was a sketch or a wind-up or something. But I'm just shocked that we've been running for over 10 years. We get the usual visits, you know, other authorities that we do just to basically as a check-up for us. And, you know, we keep to all the legislation, etc. And I just couldn't believe that they couldn't have dealt with it in a different manner by coming up, because we get stuff in all the time. that's been found by the general public, and there's never any issues. But on this instance, they just categorically refused to meet with us or issue an apology. And that's something that today still doesn't sit right with me, because if I do wrong, I was always taught, if you do wrong, put your hands up and say you've done wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Just a final thought. Do you know this? Did someone actually complain about you to the police then? They must have done.
No, the member of the public, from what information we've managed to find out through the solicitors and obviously the court paper and everything else, is they confirmed that one had been lost and that it could be in, and basically it could be in our possession, because obviously we had it on social media. And at that point, the police took it on themselves to say, oh, well, it must be a theft then, and come out and arrest me.
It's crazy, isn't it? Crazy. You expect more up north, frankly.
Well, to be fair, I'm just shocked that they've spent so much money, public money, which is what it is, let's be honest, rather than just have a half-an-hour meeting and say, look, we made a mistake, it happened, we're sorry.
Yeah, absolutely crackers. Edward, good to see you. Nice to have a bit of Barrow in the background. Hope you have a good day. Thanks very much indeed.
And we do apologise for the sound quality throughout some of that. It was a bit difficult, wasn't it? But actually it cleared up suddenly.
Yeah, magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Technology. Anyway, look, GB News has reached out to Cumbria Police for comment. They're yet to get back to us, but if they do, we'll keep you up to date.
Let's have a look now at some of the other stories coming into the newsroom this morning. And the pop star Cheryl Cole has paid tribute to Liam Payne following the 31-year-old's death on Wednesday night. Cheryl, who shares a 7-year-old son, Bear, with Liam, wrote on Instagram describing his death as earth-shattering. She, of course, reminded the public after some of the horrendous news stories that he wasn't only a star, but he was also a son, a brother, an uncle, a dear friend and a father.
A former police detective has been jailed for 19 years for stealing £400,000 worth of cocaine from work to sell on the streets of Manchester. Andrew Talbot was found guilty of misconduct in public office and supplying a Class A drug.
Sir Keir Starmer has agreed a Rwanda-style deal to send migrants who arrive on the Chagos Islands to St Helena, another British sovereign territory in the Atlantic Ocean. It has sparked backlash from MPs, with many still angry about the Prime Minister's decision to sign away the islands back to the Mauritius.
I'm just trying to work out the distance between the Chagos Islands and St Helena.
I looked it up. Well, yeah, I mean, they're almost a world apart, half a world apart, but one is in the middle of the Pacific, South Pacific, and the other is in the middle of the South Atlantic. With a continent in between. It's astonishing how far it is.
Yeah.
But it's another British sovereign territory, and therefore you could argue, how could it possibly be deemed to be an unsafe country?
Yes.
But
a little bit odd, isn't it?
Very.
Anyway, questions to be asked and answered on that one. Still to come, a question we want to know this morning is, how do you beat the cold? We'll find out more in a moment.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Founded in 1990 in Knightsbridge in London, the Beverly Hills Bakery offers some of the finest American baked goods in the United Kingdom. Beverly Hills Bakery has delivered gifts to all the UK Prime Ministers of the last 20 years, with I think the exception of Sir Keir Starmer so far, and provided gifts for the royal family and for royal births. As we near the 35th anniversary of the bakery, I'm joined by the owner and head pastry chef, Rosa de Souza, and Manuel de Souza, who is the director of the Beverly Hills Bakery. How marvellous to see you both. Welcome to GB News.
Thank you for inviting us.
So, why has this formula worked? Why did London need a Beverly Hills Bakery?
What we do is we're a bakery, but underlying it's actually a gifting experience.
Right.
So this is an alternative to flowers. So in terms of concept, that has maintained its originality despite going on for 35 years. And in fact, what I do is I often ask myself, why is it going strong? To remind myself to focus on those things that we need to focus on.
So instead of sending a bunch of flowers, you send a beautiful box of cakes like that, or confection like that, complete with bunnies and so on.
Exactly. So you have the concept on the one hand, but you also need the quality of product that goes inside. And I think that's where Beverly Hills Bakery has got a great product.
And it's where Rosa comes in, isn't it?
Yes.
So when did you start to bake? Did you start to bake domestically in your home, and did it spread from there?
We started from home. My mother's baking, where we didn't have all the stoves and things like that. We baked on the charcoal, you know, like fishing greens.
Yes.
And we started baking. I learned from my mother the baking.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we are always moaning about the weather in this studio.
We are British. Oh, well, in the studio.
Oh, well, wherever, outside and inside the studio.
Yes.
First of all, this morning it was far too cold. Then it's far too hot, and now it's far too cold again. But, I mean, that's the silly side of it, because at least we can get away from the studio at some point. But what about at home, now that you're worried and you're facing winter? Because millions are struggling to stay warm with the wet weather, the cost of living and, of course, cuts to fuel payments.
Yes, winter is fast approaching, so it's crucial to find cost-effective ways to save on your energy expenses whilst staying reasonably warm.
So joining us to provide advice on heating your home, or at least staying warm somehow, is one of the leading voices on lowering energy bills, Nick Miles. And you are very welcome in here this morning. I mean, a lot of people say, well, in the olden days, you just used to put on an extra jumper. But actually, it's more serious than that, isn't it? What is the best way, the most cost-effective way, to keep your home warm?
Well, I mean, some of the bigger things is we need to do more things on insulating our properties, but actually sometimes, you know, it can be simple things like turning down a thermostat. You know, those that have got the luxury of being able to afford energy bills and keep their homes on the thermostat a bit too high. If you just turn it down by one simple degree, as long as you keep it between 18 and 22 degrees, can save up to 5 to 10% of your energy bill. So that's a kind of a very simple way of doing things. But, you know, it can be other little tips and tricks you can do as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I always get it when people say about this, but like 18 degrees is not warm for a house.
No, and it's twofold actually. It's that kind of relative temperature, but also it's the kind of drafts and things you have in your house. So it's the comfort factor. So what we have a lot of old properties in our country. You've got some 8 million hard-to-treat properties built before World War II that have got poor insulation, but also very, very drafty. So it's the temperature and it's the kind of the draftiness of them that kind of keeps us uncomfortable.
In good times as well, when we think we can afford to keep the house warm, we probably keep rooms warm that don't need to be. I mean, I remember when I was a child, the spare bedrooms upstairs, or if anyone was away and not using their bedroom, they used to be kept cold. I mean, it was really chilly to go in there.
Yes, and that's it can be okay or not so okay. I mean, you've got to be really, really careful. So what we do in the summer, we keep, you know, our windows open and doors, and we let sort of a lot of air and moisture into our buildings. So one of the advantages of actually heating the rooms is over the winter period, you allow the properties to dry out. Now, what I wouldn't recommend is to say the bedrooms where you obviously sleep at night, that you never sort of heat them, because what can happen is, you know, temperatures are low, they say 16 degrees, that's when it becomes really, really dangerous. And if you've got respiratory ailments, you can contract things like hypothermia, you know, and other sorts of things. So I would always recommend, you know, keeping that temperature in habitable rooms, but also it's not good to always not heat particular parts of the house because you can kind of attract things like condensation and mould. So you've just got to be a little bit careful about that.
You've mentioned insulation a couple of times, and that's all well and good. The problem is with all the things, it's always too little, too late, isn't it? Because people who are dreading this winter probably can't get round to sort of sorting out insulation very quickly. Also, they may not be able to afford it.
Yes, and that is a big problem, and that's always the challenge, isn't it? It's kind of making those decisions. Well, actually, when you should be doing the stuff is during the warmer months because you don't have the weather disruption and things like that. But you can do things like still, let's say, as you go up into your attic and, you've got...
Is that the first place you should really insulate if you can only afford one part?
And that's where the problem is, and that's where people always think, oh, I do have my loft insulation up there, but then when you actually open up the loft hatch and you see all those suitcases and Christmas decoration pressed against the loft insulation, well, that's not very, very effective, actually. The insulation should be nice and fluffy. Not pressed down, and so people think, well, we've got the loft insulation up there, but actually
it shouldn't be compressed.
It shouldn't be compressed, no. And people have actually boarded it down as well. And they think, oh, I've sorted that out, but actually, it's effective when it's nice and loose.
Yeah, I mean, is it more old houses that are the problem? I mean, presumably modern houses are being built to a different standard now, aren't they?
Well, absolutely, and I'd say, government policies always kind of get criticised, but one thing that has developed in the right way is building regulations. And you look at things like insulation, air quality, ventilation. Those are all important things. But we do have a very old housing stock in Europe. Say probably in terms of kind of insulation quality, second worst in the whole of the continent. So with those 8 million homes, you do have a lot of old people and vulnerable people living in those properties as well, and those are the ones that really lack that kind of
Can you still get grants towards insulation and things like that?
You can, but, it's a very complicated landscape out there. People don't often have the information, and when they are available, they are kind of very narrowly targeted. So they are sort of targeted, I'd say, to the most vulnerable, but sometimes the way these things are presented, and also kind of with government policy changing, you don't have those kind of stable footings out there for people to really make those long...
And it would take time to actually investigate too now, and maybe not quite enough time to get everything done.
Yes, and you need that kind of cross-party consensus. It should really be a medium and long-term strategy, not kind of a political football match.
Yeah. I tell you what I did when the prices were really high, the heating prices were really high a couple of years ago over the winter. Instead of just putting the heating on, like yours, it's time to put the heating on, you put it on and it's on every day for however long. Didn't do it at all. I instead just boosted it for a couple of hours, and then I live in a modern house that is well insulated. I mean, this is the difference. But actually, just a couple of hours boost kept it going and took the chill off.
Quite a while, yeah.
And so we need to start thinking along those lines a little bit.
Well, that's very fortunate because with your relatively modern house, because of the good quality of insulation, what you did there is you created that kind of thermal mass in the fabric of the building, that's your walls and your roof. So actually what you did is that the property there store that energy for you because you boosted it, and then it sort of slowly released it back into that environment.
Yeah.
So very fortunate that you could do that, but if you live in a very drafty home, it all kind of leaks out.
The more you talk about it, the more you realise how some people must be really dreading this winter, because there's nothing worse than sitting freezing in a really cold house. And I suppose if any of us have older relatives or know older people, we should sort of check up that they're OK.
Oh, absolutely.
From a heat point of view, let alone anything else.
Well, absolutely. And then, we want people to live in the confines of a warm house. We don't want people sort of... And I had this sort of yesterday, sitting on my barber's chair, and, even young people are really angry about this winter fuel cut because, we can sort of see images of, poor pensioners sort of sitting on buses or, to stay warm or huddling together in shopping centres. And if we have a very cold winter, we're actually very lucky that the last 2 or 3 years it's been relatively benign. If we have a very cold winter...
Touch wood quick,
Nick, thank you very much indeed. It's good to see it. I tell you what just struck me in all of that, and it's the unfairness of life, I guess. I don't know how you address it. It's those people who have got the least money, who are most likely to live in the poorest insulated and draftiest houses, who cannot get the benefits of boosting their heating on. So they end up paying out more because they're in a situation where they can't actually improve everything else, which is just really unfair. It's a bit like, I think they've changed it now, haven't they? But it's like if you're on an energy meter, which is when you've got basically less money, so they don't want to put you on a direct debit, it was costing you more money per unit. So you've got less, so they charge you more. I mean, it's just outrageous stuff like that. It drives me mad. Drives me mad.
OK, do stick with us. We'll be back in just a couple of moments.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Sleep Report 2024 is based on a comprehensive survey conducted all across the country, and the report found that over half the population, get this, falls short of the recommended 7+ hours of required sleep each night. And shockingly, 1 in 4 of us is getting 5 hours or less. I think that includes you, doesn't it?
Yes, I'm very bad at sleep. 4 or 5, I'd say.
That's
A bit like
awful.
Maggie Thatcher. What would you get on average?
I'd say at least 6. 7 probably average.
That's probably not good. I think you probably need 8. Well, almost half of Brits rate their sleep quality as 5 out of 10 or lower.
Dr Manesh Shah and Dr Sita Shah joins us now to tell us all about the sleep and how Brits are struggling. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
First questions to you both. How many hours do you both get?
God, I think it varies. I try and hit that 7 hours of sleep.
Why are Brits so bad at getting sleep, especially in terms of hours? 4 or 5 hours for me, 6 hours for you. It's the same for everybody out there in the UK. We're just not going to bed early enough. Is it as simple as that? Or is it slightly more complicated?
Yeah, so I think the key is to establish a good routine. So waking up at the same time every day, making sure that you're going to sleep at the same time every day, and being quite sort of rigid and strict with yourself when it comes to those timings.
And also, it's not just the length of, I get, say, 7 hours, it's the quality, isn't it? You've got different phases of sleep.
Yeah.
Just explain those. Is it, as far as I remember, REM, deep sleep? Just tell us about that.
Correct, yeah. So, essentially, there's 4 stages to sleep. So there's stage 1 and stage 2, which are your lighter stages of sleep. And then stage 3 is your deeper sleep. And then you've got the stage 4, which is your REM. Which is a rapid eye movement stage. And it's the stage 3 and the REM sleep which is really, really important for restorative and regenerative sleep.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Ooh, 9:46. Ben and Ellie are going to tell us what's coming up in Saturday Morning Live.
Going to put the world to rights by the sound of it.
We've got a
We've got it all.
baby making special.
Yeah, Ben's favourite topic, actually. You're always saying that people need to have more babies, and you want to have hundreds of them, don't you?
Yes, I would like.
Hundreds is going a bit far.
No, I'd like a brood.
They are very expensive, Ben. That's the only thing I'd say. I mean, I love children, and I had so many, but they're very expensive, and they don't ever stop being expensive.
No, well, I was just saying to our makeup colleague Helen, my son Zach goes to nursery 2 days a week. I can't believe how much it costs. It's the price of a mortgage on a flat.
He's on 2 so far.
Two so far.
He'd like 10. But the reason we're talking about this is because our very own Miriam Cates of this parish is at the European Congress of Families in Dubrovnik today. So it's all about how we can make
more babies.
How we can make more babies.
Are they worried about that in
They're very worried about it in Europe.
Because lots of people are worried about
birth rate is down. Yeah.
I mean, they're catastrophically low in some countries.
Yeah, Japan. If Japan goes the way they are, there'll be no Japanese people left in about 100 years, I think the figure is.
And Italy's the same.
Italy, yeah.
I mean, their birth rate is already so far down that the older people, as people are getting older, they've got no idea who's going to keep them.
Why do we need a conference on how to have if people want babies, have a baby.
Because
it's expensive.
Yes,
it's difficult.
It's so expensive.
Oh,
You've
so
actually got to subsidise it.
Oh, do we?
Yes.
Now.
Sorry about this.
I've got to
and I know you're
subsidise.
Stephen doesn't like the idea of subsidising people.
If people want children, I like children.
Yeah.
They're all good, and I'm sure you're...
Well, I was going to ask you to babysit my boys next weekend at the
I'd be
Arsenal
more
game.
than happy to babysit. I love babysitting. However,
You'll be
I
a
don't want to subsidise your children, Beth.
No.
Come on.
Anybody else's.
I'm a bit skint.
Those children will subsidise you in your old age.
Good.
Yeah, and care for you in the care home.
Yeah.
But also, I think
You
it's
need
the,
young people in
yes.
a population to earn the money to pay the taxes that are going to keep us all when we're older.
And we're also going to be talking about the complexities of raising children in today's world as well, because things like social media and the addiction to social media, how do you even raise children in this kind of society? Lots of big questions.
I don't envy you that one, I must say. I mean, we when my kids were quite little, we introduced a computer into the house for the first time, and it was so basic. You had to wait 10 minutes for it to actually get onto the internet.
A VIC-20.
Yeah, it was something one of those, yeah. But now, I would seriously worry about when you give them a tablet or a smartphone.
And I don't think adults should have social media. I think it's so
toxic.
Bad. The amount of times I've sat there and I've realised it's an hour's gone by and I've just been scrolling incessantly.
Yeah, it's bad. Are you going to stop your kids from having it then?
I don't want them to have... I mean...
no smartphones till
Yeah, but they've grown up watching you scroll on yours.
I know, and I feel bad because my youngest son, if my phone's on the side, he will bring me my phone as if... Here you go, Daddy, you've left your phone, because he sees me on it so much. It's very
that's really bad, Ben.
It is bad.
How old is your eldest?
4.
He was 5 2 days ago.
Right.
Anyway, so behind all the fertility rates...
So bad. You were looking after 3 nephews
I was
last night.
looking after 3 nephews yesterday, and I'm in no rush because it was a lot.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot, and they're very noisy. How do you cope with noise?
I go upstairs.
I need some noise cancelling.
I noticed that you posted a picture of a very large tray that was just covered in crisps.
That was my parenting. That's all I did. I provided the snacks.
Here's 5 kilograms of crisps. Now eat them and be quiet.
And that was all I provided.
And also, a similar theme on families. Apparently, according to the Mail, the widely held view that many parents are trapped in loveless, unhappy marriages is a myth. So let us know about your marriages. Are you trapped? Are you unhappy?
You're trapped, aren't you?
I have... I say this to my wife. I feel slightly trapped because I'd like to live and work abroad, but she doesn't. So I'm not going to leave my kids or her.
Where do you want to move to? The US?
I'd love to go to America.
Would you?
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
Texas?
Yeehaw.
Give it a go.
Cowboy boots?
Well, I can't, Anne, because
no, she won't go.
She won't go.
She won't go.
She doesn't know how wonderful it is. You ought to take her there on holiday first.
No, we did go. We went to shooting ranges and all sorts.
Yeah. They didn't quite win her over.
Had burgers.
We're also going to be talking about Harry and Meghan's move to Portugal. Why are celebrities heading to Portugal? It's all to do with, well, you know all about this, tax. And
yeah, so lots of celebs are going to Portugal. Harry and Meghan, there's a lower capital gains tax rate, and it kind of coincides with the fact apparently lots of millionaires are fleeing Britain because of the looming budget and, of course, Labour's approach to finances.
Oh, and it's National Chocolate Week.
Is it?
Yes.
Why haven't we touched on that?
You need to mark that in your calendar.
It's probably starting Monday. Is it?
That's a great question, Anne.
Oh. But you're getting it started anyway.
We're going to start today anyway, whatever happens.
Favourite chocolate bar?
I'm really boring. I like a Galaxy or a Dairy Milk. I just think you can't...
Just plain?
Yeah, just don't mess with it. Chocolate is perfection by itself.
Oh, well, here's a question.
I like a whole nut.
Yeah. Oh, you see, I like a topic.
A whole nut?
Do they still make topics?
I'm not sure if they do still make topics.
I haven't seen a topic in years.
I used to like a topic.
Have you seen one recently?
No, I haven't.
Are they still making topics?
I do quite like it.
They do. I love topics.
What's your favourite chocolate?
Lion Bar or Peanut.
Yeah.
Oh, Peanut.
I like chewy.
Very nutty.
Lion Bar I'm not that keen on. I do like a double-decker.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah. Do you know they've taken them out of the tins at Christmas this year?
Oh, yeah, but I think that's good.
Oh, why?
I think that's good because, well, they haven't been in tins for years. They moved from tin to plastic and now they're going to cardboard.
Yeah, I'd rather have cardboard then. They're out of the cardboard.
I'd rather have cardboard. I don't mind that.
And finally, we have an update from the US race for the White House. Nelson Aspen, live, of course, from New York, with all his energy and humour. And did you see Donald Trump calling Kamala Harris a loser last night?
Yeah.
Is that going to work, do you think? Because, I mean, all the analysis says if Trump focused on policies, he'd get more support.
Yeah, if he focused on immigration and the economy, he'd be ahead, because that's what's hitting with Middle America.
Well, he's steaming ahead in the polls now. Every swing state, Trump is now ahead.
Oh, but it is...
Well, steaming ahead is pushing it, isn't it? There's probably
half of a 1%
or something.
I'm a tabloid man, Stephen.
Yeah, well, clearly. But let the facts get in
It's
the way of
been
a good
neck and
story,
neck,
Ben.
that
Romping home.
That's what's so remarkable.
I wouldn't like to call it.
It's going to be dangerously close.
Yeah.
Because if he loses by a tiny margin, they ain't going to let that rest, are they?
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, both ways. What will happen once either candidate wins/loses?
Well, we had a guest on this morning who is a Democrat, has to be said, but as he said, the Democrats would respect the process, and I think that, well, that's traditionally what happens.
As they did back with Al Gore and Bush, yeah.
Clinton was saying that Russia rigged the vote when Trump won in 2016. I mean, that's arguably not respecting the process.
Well, they didn't fight it.
No, they didn't fight it.
Yeah, but you can say it's not, we don't like it, we don't think it's right. But there's a big difference
But
between
Trump
that.
will not accept if he loses.
No.
He just won't accept it.
And even if he had a case, I don't know that is necessarily the right way forward, because it causes so many problems.
Yeah. And it's the personal attacks again. I mean, we've seen age come back into this debate. Kamala Harris suggesting that Donald Trump is exhausted, and that's why he's been cancelling media interviews.
She's saying everything she can think of at the moment to attack him personally, isn't she?
I sort of don't...
But it's all to play for.
I know, people will have a go at me.
3 weeks to go.
I don't mind her doing that and having a go about the age, because that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
He Biden,
You
so
can't
it's
play
like,
that card anymore.
It's like you can't have your cake and eat it, can you?
Anyway, we'll clear the desk for you.
Thank you.
And leave you to it.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yeah.
see you
Suit
again
yourself.
tomorrow.
We will.
Bye.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Not quite the calm before the storm, but for many today will be a fine and bright day, and then tomorrow we'll all see a wet and windy spell. For many it will just be that, but for some, well, storm actually could bring some disruption. Back to this morning, though, and it's a pretty drab start over much of eastern England. Cloud and outbreaks of rain only slowly pulling away, but it should be turning drier as the day goes on, certainly brightening up over the Midlands and elsewhere. Many places seeing some sunshine in the west. A few showers